Good evening, everyone. I call to order the virtual study session of the Lakewood City Council on June 15, 2026 at 7:01 p.m. To connect with the council meeting online, please use one of the following links at lakewoodspeaks.org or at lakewoodco.gov/council videos. For online public comments, you can post comments of any link to lakewoodspeaks.org. That's our online forum for public comments. It will be left open through the night tonight until 10 a.m. tomorrow for any comments related to this evening's presentations. And we have two topics we'll be talking about tonight. One, potential conversation about potential charter updates that may land on the ballot in the fall. And then separately, our second discussion will be centered around zoning and picking up and how do we move forward from here. So with that, will the city clerk please start us by calling on the roll?
Councilors Black.
Present.
Cruz I.
Here.
Cruz K.
Here.
Berman. Councilor Berman.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Here.
Gotcha. Oh, there we go.
Yep.
Thank you. LeBure.
Here.
Lowe.
Here.
Nystrom.
Here.
Ryan.
Here.
Sinks.
Here.
Sharzai is absent. Mayor Strom.
Here.
Great. You have a quorum. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, good evening, everyone. So we'll get started with our first topic for this evening, give you a little background on that. So the city charter is something similar to the city's constitution, if you will, and it's something that legally there are updates that we want to look at or consider every once in a while, and we've got a number of them. It's been a while since we've updated our city charter. So this year, actually, it was in our last cycle with council setting priorities, the conversation came forward of let's update the charter. And so last year, as many of you may know, we instead decided to elongate the year and spend more time discussing zoning. So a number of these things, including charter updates, did not get discussed last year. So we this year very promptly set up or stood up a new ad hoc committee to actually pick up this discussion. So for the last couple of months, we've had a committee of a number of our city councilors going through the charter to talk about where we are, what kind of needs we may have as we're looking to update that charter so that we can continue that regular evaluation of are we in alignment with state law, are we meeting community needs, and those types of things. Conversation that you're hearing tonight about the charter is a product of the conversations that have been going on with the committee over the last couple of months. Councilor Dave Ryan is the committee chair for our ad hoc charter committee, so he will be leading this evening's conversation. And with that, Councilor Ryan, I'll hand the floor over to you to kick us off. Councilor Ryan, you're on mute.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Robb, if you wouldn't mind pulling up the slide deck. And as the mayor said, she did a fantastic, as usual, explanation of where we're at. I want to thank, if you could go to the next slide, please. I want to thank our mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, Councilor Sinks, Councilor Nystrom, and Councilor LeBure for helping us work through these, and to the extent we've received some public input as well. And so I want to thank the public as well who were able to participate and provide some comments as well. We're going to talk about five potential amendments that we are recommending that we'd like the City Council to give us some feedback and discuss some more as to whether it goes forward to first reading. And we'll mention one of the topics that we didn't consider. It's gotten a lot of interest, and so we'll talk about that as to whether it needs to be added or not. But we're not advocating that one at that time. If you can go to the first or next slide, please, Mr. Rob. So these are the sections. So 2.6, 12.12, and then 13.1 and 13.2 can go hand in hand. It changes to the initiative and referendum. And for those of you who are great at math, you're like, I count 5, I don't see 6. 13.2 actually has 2 pieces that we're going to talk about tonight. If you can go to the next one, please. So, and I know I'm breaking every rule of PowerPoint and all that kind of stuff. Way too many words, right? And a lot of this is in your packet, but I just wanted to give a bit of a summary of the rationale. So in 2.6 talks about when, in part, when folks are going to be sworn in after they've been elected. And one of the problems we've been running into is it takes time to certify the election. And so while we're waiting to certify the election, lo and behold, here's our next city council meeting. And historically, what we've done is to cancel the next city council meeting so that we can stay compliant with our charter. And next slide, please. And so this one is probably the easiest in terms of language to see that what we're changing here. What we're suggesting is that we'd have the first regular meeting following certification of the results, and that'll give the city clerk's office to a time to certify the results. And after those are certified, that's when we'd have our regular, that's when folks would be sworn in. So that's the first change. And I'd open it up for any discussion if there's any thoughts that folks have. Or what I intend to do is when we're all done, just to kind of bring it back to the larger discussion of whether we want to move forward with all of them or some of them or none of them. But are there any questions about this proposed recommendation? No. Okay. Easy group here. Said never for our city council. Next slide, please. So the next one is on 12.12. Some of you, well, I think all of us, almost all of us on council saw that at one point the city council had agreed to reduce property taxes. And then there's a question as to whether we could go back to what that tax rate was. I'm talking about the mill rate, the property tax mill rate, or whether we had to do it in stages. And as an abundance of caution, we did it in stages. And part of it was because the language is a little bit unclear. There's a few things with this 12.12. First, it was written before Tabor existed. So it says you can only raise things by 7% and so forth. Well, none of that applies because Tabor is one of the things that would control, and then obviously we debruced as well. And so how does that work? And so just to take all that mystery out, this rationale, if you could move to the next slide, please. We looked at 2 different options on how to clarify this language. We could just say, hey, we're going to be compliant with Tabor, or we'll use the more expansive term and say we're going to be compliant with the Colorado Constitution, which of course includes Tabor. And the language in red there, or orange, depending on your color scheme there, it gives just a little bit of sense as to what we're doing. So we picked option number 2. Next slide, please. And because it's really hard to read in orange or red, I didn't make all of that but this section would basically rewrite 12.12. And so you see in the first part, it reminds us that we're going to follow the Constitution in terms of how we do the mill levies. And then the second paragraph talks about how we can temporarily reduce the property tax levy and then return it back to what it was before without having concerns of limitations in the charter that way. So it actually makes it easier for us to at least do temporary tax reductions without fear that we can't return back to where we were before. And so it gives the city council more flexibility to make these short-term reductions, if you will. And then in the last part is just making sure that everyone understands that there's Nothing here is going to be construed to limit the city's authority beyond what the Colorado Constitution and state law requires. Any questions about this one? There's a lot of words here, but it's not a huge lift. It changes it modernizes how we think about these things because that were all outdated. Wow, you guys are just so fantastic today. You ate a lot for dinner, you're in a coma, perhaps. Okay, next slide, please. Section 13.1. So this is one of those where right now we have 90 days after it's certified, we say, yes, the petition's been certified, and city council agrees that it should go to the voters. We have 90 days. And the way that the city has been able to try and comply with this as best as possible to also accommodate our military and overseas voters, and also comply with state statutes that require us to also consider our military that are serving. Folks are actually getting the ballots printed before we even sent that election date because there's such a tight time frame and turnaround. And so next frame, please, or next slide. We had two options here. We chose option number 2 to say, and there's no substantive difference between these two options. The first one just says we're gonna use the number of days the state statute requires, and that's 150 days rather than the 90 days. And that will give us time to be able to make sure that we get our ballots back from those serving overseas or who are just in active military, for example. And option number 2 says, yes, we'll insert the state statute date or time frame number of 150 days, but also explicitly say that we're also trying to make sure that we're accommodating and making sure that we're not disenfranchising any active duty military folks as well. And so the language you're going to see on the next slide will be this option 2. So it looks like there's a lot going on there, but the only thing that's changing is really our time frame from no less than, that the election normally would have to be held within 90 days, now to be held within 150 days if this goes to the ballot and is approved, and no less than 60 days rather than 30 days. And then the rest is just that language really to emphasize that we are taking our responsibilities to our active duty military voters with earnest. Any questions on this section? Well, if you don't have any questions on this one, you're going to love the next one, Mr. Rob. So separately, we have the one for referendum. And this is in 13.2E. And so if you think of the language we just talked about, what we are proposing is doing the exact same thing in this section, except, the only difference in this section is rather than saying an initiative, it refers to a referendum. So the same time frames, 90 days, 150 days, 60 days and 150 days. You can go backwards, actually. Mr. Rob was trying to anticipate me. To go backwards, please. One more, please. There we go. So this is in 13.1, but in 13.2E, it's the same language, 150 days, 60 days, and emphasis on our active duty military. And I want you to have to stare at all of that language again, but just for grins, we're going to do it. So the initiative and referendum, 13.1, 13.2E, identical, other than one refers to a referendum and the other refers to initiative. Any questions on that? Was that clear as mud? Yes, please. Miss Councilor Cruz. Yay, I get to call on people.
Thank you. appreciate all the work you all have put into this so far. My question, and I'm sorry, I didn't jump in fast enough on the last iteration of this, so it stands for the other one too. Where did you all land on the 150 days?
So that's a state statute. What the
Okay.
state statute says for the state elections, that there'd be 150 days time frame to, and the motivation is primarily to make sure they have time to get the ballots to our active military. And so rather than just picking a random number out of the air, we said, hey, let's use the state statute and follow that number.
Okay, that's helpful. And do we, just remind me, do we align on the other kind of aspects of our referendum and like those initiative pieces around like the threshold and all of that, or are we just aligning on this?
We're just aligning on this for now. I think some of those other nuances, if you will, we are suggesting be left for further discussion. We had a pretty tight time turnaround, right? The resolution was approved, was it March 23rd? And so we had 3 meetings or so to be able to get to this point. We think there may be some more discussion that might be useful. And the other thing is, on some of those other nuanced things might be able to be done internally because they're not governed by the charter itself. Well, we could put it in the charter, but I don't know that there's a need to. We could probably deal with those internally. And I see our esteemed legal counsel popping online like, I need to correct something here. You're on mute. Oh.
I have been battling Zoom, and so I am actually trying to join by my phone right now because my computer's fighting me. So no, I was not commenting on anything the two of you are discussing.
Oh, fantastic. Yay. All right. Well, thank you. I'm sorry for the technology battles. Any other questions? I mean, this is not intuitive stuff here, right? I mean, this is kind of nerdy language here that we're talking about, but it could be fairly important as to how we handle our initiatives and referendums. And there may be some other upside issues as well, but this is our primary motivation. Okay, let's go to the next. Let's go a couple more slides here. We'll keep going. This one. All right. So let's go back. So on our public comment, I think this is the one that, as my kids might say, getting the most spicy comments. And but let's talk through it and decide how we want to go through on that. So on 13.2a, the thought is, right now there are some items that the charter says are not eligible for a referendum. And so the question is, if the city council passes an ordinance simply to comply with state law, let's take ADUs, for example, accessory dwelling units that we passed, I don't know, it's quite some time ago, but that was in compliance with state law. There was no extra sauce. We followed what the state required us to do and moved that through. Is that something that should be eligible to be considered for a referendum or not? So if you go to the next slide, we'll see the language. Thankfully, this language is pretty straightforward. And I think, you have the entire text here. And again, I know it breaks every rule for PowerPoints, but I wanted you to see the context of there are other things that we have said or that the charter has said are not eligible for referendum. And the language in red is the proposal as to whether we should adopt this or not. Questions on this one? Okay. So, oh, yes, Councilor LeBure is one of our esteemed members.
Hey, Counselor. Thanks for the PowerPoint presentation. I'm enjoying it. Yeah, I did have a question. I thought you were going to answer it for me before, so I wouldn't have to ask the question. But I had a question about, like our WUI discussion that was,
Yes.
happening recently. The question is, okay, if that might have been a law, to comply with state law, but we might have taken some extra liberties to, so go above and beyond state law. And I'm wondering, how that plays out in, under this charter, language, something like that, where we're complying with state law, but maybe we're going a little bit further. And so I wanted to get your take on that. Or anybody else's take on that.
That strikes me as like a pure legal question that I think our legal counsel would say probably not open for our discussion in this forum, but Ms. McKinney-Brown, if you could chime in as to whether this is an appropriate forum to discuss that.
Counselor Allison may still be having issues connecting. I see a little message saying she's trying to join.
There's 2 of her. Maybe we need 3 of her. Well, so I'm going to ask you to hold that question. I don't feel I could venture a guess, but it's not my role in this capacity to be able to answer that. And I think it's a fair question. So putting aside that question, are there any other questions about this proposal? Councillor Nystrom, another esteemed member.
I feel bad leaving you hanging out there. Nobody asking questions, so I thought I'd ask.
Okay, I can hang with that.
Yeah, I get the spirit of this one, and and sitting through the discussions and everything, I kind of got it. But on the other hand, I've gotten a lot of pushback on this, and between the ward meeting and some other things. And I think legally or not, however that falls, there's concerns about the home rule position that we have. And I think, there's some sensitivity about that right now, and for obvious reasons. But I think, I think we're getting over our skis trying to make this change right now. I think the optics are not good. And I also, again, if there's a law implemented at the state level that we act on kind of prematurely and implement, for lack of a better word, I could see where this could go sideways on us. So I don't know, I guess a word of caution. I've received quite a few text messages and had some conversations with people at the ward meeting and things like that about this one. So
okay, hold on to that thought for a moment, because we are going to get to the point of like, all right, which ones do we want to advance and which ones do we want to hold on to? And so I appreciate your comment. Yeah, Councilor Sinks, all of our esteemed members here chiming in here.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'll say thank you again, Chair, for your work on this and organizing us, etc. Specifically to 13.2A. So once again, it only changes that a referendum will not be submitted to a special election which goes against state law. Correct? That's the only change.
That's right? Correct.
Okay, and then as a follow-up, but having if we adopt 13.2A, that doesn't mean that council couldn't hear from constituents and say, oh, wait a minute, we're going to sue the state and not follow this law. We know that some municipalities did that for zoning, and I'm certainly not advocating for that stance. Just making the point that it's not a slam dunk here. By having 13.2A doesn't mean that we don't have any recourse for state law that we disagree with. Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, the way I understand it, as you said, City Council in its infinite wisdom could say, this particular state law, we're not stinky cheese in Denmark, right? And so we think you've gone beyond state, we think you've gone beyond your authority to tell us what to do, and we're going to file a lawsuit and challenge that. Yeah. So whether this is in place in our in our charter, as the mayor said, our version of the Constitution, or not, we still have that ability to challenge state laws when we feel that it's right to do so.
Right. Thank you. And then to just draw my comments to a close, I would say that then constituents would still have a voice. So this is not eliminating any citizens' voices, because citizens could certainly then go to city council and say, stop, hold the presses. We want you to vote against, this state law and take action to keep it from becoming, something that Lakewood has to follow. So constituents would still have a voice, even though this would be if we choose to pass it, correct?
That sounds right to me. I don't know if our esteemed legal counsel is back with us or still throwing words at her technology. We can't hear you, but we see you. Nope. All right, let's go to our next caller, Councillor Black.
Yeah, just to kind of continue Councillor Sink's line of questioning, because I know we're staying in the questioning sort of section of this versus whether or not we sort of personally feel it's a good idea. I think, isn't it true, tell me if I'm wrong or not, even if folks in our community did decide to run a special election because there was something in a state law that was handed to us that they didn't like, even if that special election passed with a vote of the people, the recourse for us as a municipality, we would still need to take legal action against the state, correct? The sheer fact of having a special election in which our constituents voted wouldn't of in itself negate our requirement to pass this state law. Is that true?
Ms. McKinney Brown, any luck?
It's a hard time to lose our legal counsel.
I so desperately want to speak, but I don't think that's a good idea. There she is. All right. Who reads lips?
I guess, and just to close, since we're not going to get an answer on that. I think what I'm sort of trying to say is it feels to me, and of course we need to get our attorneys kind of feedback on that that even if some citizens were to run a special election directly regarding a state law, there would be a number of other steps that a municipality would need to take in order to negate a state law or a state requirement. So that would sort of render an election or special election not valid, because there would be all these other things that would need to happen before we would be able to move forward with not adopting a state law. So again, but it sounds like we're not quite ready to get an answer on that. But so I'll just hold from there.
Looks like different connection here.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Holy mackerel. That has been 30 minutes of a fight. The answer to Jacob Labier's question, which I was desperately trying to answer, and it might answer many more of these questions, is that if there were to be any type of change between the state law and a local law, then it would not, this would not apply. So you change one word between the state law and the local law, and this proposed change would not apply. This would have to be word for word. It would also have to be approved by the city council. The question is, if the city council believed that this was a home rule violation, that the state law being passed was a home rule violation, would they be mandated to pass the state version? And no, they wouldn't. The question comes back, and I don't have an answer this evening. I really think this is something we need to consider more. But if the city council felt that the state law was fine and they passed it word for word, this section would provide there wouldn't be a referendum. But if the members of the community felt that it was potentially a home rule violation or that there was some issue, would the city council have taken away their constitutional legislative rights? And I don't know the answer to that question. This is thinking outside the box, and I think it's something we're going to have to look into more closely.
Okay. And maybe you could walk us through just to make sure we're all on the same page. I'm a member of the community. I'm unhappy with some ordinance the city council passed, and I get the requisite number of signatures. I provide that to the clerk's office, who approves signatures, everything else. What is the choice the city council has at that point in time?
When the citizen group gathers the requisite number of petition signatures on a ballot petition, then per state constitution, the petition is either whatever's being referred, whatever's being questioned, the legislative action being questioned, is either immediately withdrawn by the city council, action of the city council, or if the city council doesn't want to withdraw the ordinance that's being referred, they can move it to the voters. So there's two actions that can be taken. And these aren't things that we have a lot of room to maneuver on because they're mandated by the Colorado Constitution. It's basically the only mandate that the Colorado Constitution has for home rule charters.
But we could, if we wanted to, adopt language like we're considering at this point in time and still be kosher with all of the state requirements.
I think this is new enough that I would rather discuss this in an executive session than discuss it in an open meeting. I think where the city council is considering going is such an innovative direction that I'd want a little more time to look at it and then for us to discuss it in executive session.
Okay. Councilor Lowe.
Thank you, Councilor Ryan. And I really appreciate the work the Charter Commission has put in on this, sort of above and beyond with all the other meetings that we have. This presentation was, despite your modesty about the PowerPoint, I thought this was a really helpful summary. So thank you. This is also a question from Ms. McKinney-Brown, and it goes back a little bit to the previous change, but it relates to what Ms. McKinney-Brown just said. So we're proposing to change the time frame once you've met the signature requirement from 30 to 90 days to 60 to 150 days, right? That was the previous change we reviewed. Hypothetically, a point of feedback that I've gotten, frankly, from folks on both sides of the campaign we just had is, gosh, it's not ideal to have these incredibly consequential elections just randomly show up in January, in April, at times of year that people really aren't expecting to vote. And feedback I've heard from people that actually voted yes and no on the recent election is it really would be ideal and optimal to decide questions this consequential like in November. Setting aside the question of whether this is a good policy idea or an actually good change in the charter, I'm just curious, legally, under the provision of the Constitution that Ms. McKinney-Brown just expounded on, if we wanted to change the charter to give council the flexibility to delay a special election, say to the next November election, would we even have that flexibility? Or based on the provision Ms. McKinney-Brown just said, are we actually mandated under the Constitution because we're a home rule municipality to schedule the special election within, I guess it's not 90 days, but within 150 days because of the overseas ballot issue?
I'm hoping that we're not conflating two separate issues. So I want to just double check. There are two issues that we're looking at. The first one is the current timeline in both the referendum and initiative election process is too short to accommodate modern elections. So we're wanting to expand those out to match state law, that is absolutely fine. And as a matter of fact, would move us closer to, I think, are not only legal, but help us remain legal. So that's one issue. The second issue is, can we just say there are no special elections for referendums or initiatives? I don't think so. I think that the Constitution, it was very careful in stating that there are certain things retained by the people. And the one thing you can't use a charter for is to do anything that takes away the referendum or initiative rights. This city council and this city is incredibly supportive of that. But as frustrating as it is for people to have these random special elections pop up, as frustrating as it is because they're incredibly expensive, it's the basic premise of Colorado law, Colorado home rule law, is that the people ultimately have control over what happens in their city. So I interpret the Constitution, and I should probably say any of this out loud, but here it is. I think that the Constitution requires that if there's going to be a referendum or initiative, that it be held within a certain amount of time. I also want to differentiate a referendum for an ordinance or an initiative of an ordinance is a very different legal process than an initiative for a charter change. Two separate legal issues. We're only talking about initiatives or referendums for ordinances.
Yeah, understood. Thank you. I think I completely understand, but let me just make super clear that we're not talking past each other. I do just want to clarify for anyone that listens to this recording later, because I don't want to be misinterpreted. I am not suggesting, right, that the right of the people to have an election be removed. What I'm musing on out loud is whether there's a legal option to just hold the election over 3 or 4 or 5 months until the next regular November election, whether it's an odd number or an even number a year, on the theory that people are more engaged and more used to voting in November, and that it actually gives the people a stronger voice ultimately because they're much more used to voting on their sort of their regular ballot in November than in April. But Ms. McKinney-Brown, if I understood you correctly, you understood my question. You understand that I'm not saying we take away elections altogether. I'm certainly not suggesting that. You understood that I was saying, can we delay it to the next November election? And you're understand. I am talking specifically about the initiative and referendum process for ordinances, not for charter amendments. And your read of the Colorado Constitution is we don't have the flexibility to postpone an election until November. That is in violation of the powers that the Constitution gives to home rule municipalities.
That would be my read. With a referendum, you could probably work it in a way that was no harm, no foul, because a referendum is to nullify an ordinance that's already been passed by the city council. So you might be able to work it with a referendum to say the ordinance just doesn't go into effect and all of this time passes where this ordinance is not in effect. And I could see that being really frustrating from a practical point of view when the city's trying to address whatever the issue was within the ordinance. But a citizen initiative is different. The people have brought it now. They want an action on it now. I wouldn't know how we could slow that down.
Okay, so apologies, Chair Ryan, but let me ask the question very specifically to the referendum process for a council passed ordinance. Hypothetically, if we wanted to amend the charter to say that for a council passed ordinance, when a certain number of signatures are collected to try to repeal the ordinance, when it comes before city council currently either has to repeal it or send it to the voters. If we added a third option of the charter that said maybe it could be by a majority vote, maybe it could be by 2/3 vote options, that council would have the flexibility to schedule the election, but have it coincide with the next regular November election and suspend the ordinance so that it wasn't in effect for that time. Setting aside the question of whether that's a good idea, would that be legally permissible under the Constitution?
We would want to look at that really carefully because you've just thrown in a couple additional facts. So if the minimum number of signatures is 5% of the registered voters from the last election or whatever, but if you wanted to have, or you only had to get 3% of the voters, 3% of the signatures, if this was only to go to the next regular election, there might be ways to do that. I can't do that off the cuff, but
Sure.
take all of those extra possibility things out. If it's just to get a referendum requires 5% of registered voters. I think the way the Constitution and state law read is that if there is going to be a regular election within the next 90 days, I believe it is, then it can go on the next regular election. Otherwise, we schedule a special election. Did you lose me?
No, we can hear you. Thank you. I don't have anything more to say for now. I might later. Thank you.
Councillor Sinks.
Thank you. So what I believe the discussion just did was kind of sidetracked us from 13.2A, which adds something different than what 13.2A talks about. I might also say, being on the committee, that we wanted to be very careful not to overwhelm the ballot and throw tons of changes to the charter. So while I think that's a valid discussion, it's nothing that we want to consider, that the committee wants to consider really for this ballot. And I think hearing from a legal counsel, it could be something that we could explore, because not having charter changes for so long, so many years, and by the way, some municipalities have ballot change or have charter changes on every ballot in November. And we probably will go towards that this is just the first of catching up to update our charter. So it would be a valid discussion for maybe next year, possibly. But for this year, if we would just consider the ones that the committee put forward, and also that we just stick to the red line that's on the screen. And I wonder about any other discussion about, again, the heart of it is that we don't send to a special election any thing that the state has passed as law. Is that a correct summary? So,
well, I think it's a wonderful segue, at least, Councillor Sinks. Mr. Rob, would you mind going to, I think, our last slide? Or, yeah, that one. So this is one of the hot ones that we did talk about, and I think in some of our public comment even tonight, there's some references to the expense of having to have a special election to fill vacancies, and there's been a lot of discussion from public comment and amongst us on our commission, and I know we've heard from other councilors as well, as to whether we should take a close look at this. And we did not move forward on this one. One, because the LAC is studying some aspects of this that may inform, I think is the right word, moving forward. And as Councillor Sinks mentioned, the hope is that this Charter Commission will live on beyond just these recommendations. And Mr. Rob probably kick me later for saying this, but he had the great thought of perhaps maybe even combining it with our rules and procedures. But in whatever fashion that this Charter Commission moves forward with, there should be some topics that they do deserve a longer discussion, greater in depth and more public outreach. And we thought that this is one of those, even though we recognize it as, yes, this is an important one for to be tackled. We just didn't think in the condensed amount of time that we had that we could do it justice. So that's that. It sounds like, and not shocking for those who are betting in Vegas, that the last topic was the one that was going to generate the most discussion. How do we feel about the first four? Do we feel like we want to move all four of those forward? Councillor Cruz.
Thank you. I think to that question, I guess I'm curious. I mean, I think the answer is Yes. And are there ways to combine them so that they're not separate questions?
It would be lovely if we could. So, for example, that initiative and referendum, which really only differs by section number and not the language, are Ms. McKinney-Brown, you can correct me. My understanding is they have to be separate. I wish they could be combined, but correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. McKinney-Brown.
You are absolutely correct. Charter amendments are the process and policies are established within state law and the state constitution, and it mandates that a separate ordinance be held for each one.
Okay, so when I've seen like other cities do combined amendments, it's like they're all in the same chapter. I'm just curious like what the rules are around that.
I cannot begin to comment on what other cities do or what their legal advice is. I can only tell you that it's very clear in state statute that it has to be an individual ordinance for each question placed in front of the voters. So we're going to follow it word for word.
I guess maybe I can ask them further questions offline. To me, I feel like we've done ordinances that do touch multiple parts of a chapter. And so I'm just like a little confused why this has to be so discrete when some of our other procedures are less discrete.
So I think people get confused between an ordinance and a charter amendment. Those are two very different processes. An ordinance is a legislative action. So we do the city council passes ordinances all the time. Ordinances are also a single topic, but we may have multiple sections as long as they are addressing a single topic. We are under a whole different body of law right now. Charter amendments are a different body of law than you have ever dealt with. We haven't done charter amendments, at least since I've been here, and I think it's been quite a bit further back than that. So we're going back to the state law and the Colorado Constitution and following those rules exactly. So whole different body of law when you're dealing with amending the charter. And the best analogy is Congress passes laws all the time. But when it comes to amending the Constitution, that's a whole different process than just regularly passing a law. So it's really that different.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And maybe I'll just need to look at some of the other things I've just noticed in some other cities. They've kind of combined some pieces. So helpful to understand your interpretation.
Excellent question, though. This is one I was hoping you would be right on. Again, just keeping our focus on the first four. So again, that's 2.6, 12.12, 13.1, and 13.2. The E. Now I've lost my train of thought. Yes, E. So initiative or referendum. So this first four, do we feel comfortable in at least moving them forward to a first reading, and obviously we'll have to vote at some point how we want to do that. But moving forward, the first four, can I get at least a Councilor Nystrom, how do you feel about the first four? Okay, yay. All right. So on the last one, if I might ask Ms. McKinney-Brown, it sounded like you would like to have some more consideration about that, about this one, the 13.2A. And Mr. Rob, if you can go to that not the typewriter, but the one right after the typewriter. For kids at home, that other one was a typewriter. So for this one, it sounded like, Ms. McKinney-Brown, you'd like some further discussion. Is it possible for us, if we decided to still, we think it deserves merit to move forward, subject to whatever you come back to us with, that we could move it forward, you could study it, and if you say, hold the presses, we need to stop moving it forward, we could do so? Is that an option?
That's an option. Again, this is a new way of thinking about things. It's very innovative. And so when I evaluate this, I am putting on my innovative hat and looking at it from all the different angles that it might be criticized. And it could very well be that this is the right match for Lakewood. That's not my call. That is a city council decision. And it could be that the city council isn't wanting to do that this year. Again, city council choice. I think that because we're talking about a charter section, amendment of a charter, that when we're coming down to is it legal or is it not legal, or what are the legal ramifications, that I'm just much more comfortable being open with all of my thoughts in an executive session. I tend to really limit what I say when I'm speaking publicly, because someone will hear it and interpret it to mean something that I never intended. And I don't want to be the one dictating what city council's policy is. I want city council to have the ability to make the best choice for the city. So this is one I would rather discuss offline in an executive session if we want to get into all of the legal thoughts I might have.
So would you walk us through, and because I think you'll be less apt to make a mistake in saying the dates than I will. If we were to moving forward with all of these, what's our time frames that we have to hit if we're going to have it on the ballot for this November again?
The very last dates that these could go on a agenda would be the first and second regular meetings in August. So that'd be August 10th and August 24th. Those are the very last possible dates. If I had my druthers, you would choose July 27th and August 10th to be second reading, because that way, if there's any issues or concerns, we still have the 24th to fall back on. Because these are ordinances to send something to the voter, there's no referendum period on them. I mean, it would be pointless to have a referendum to have people vote on can this go to the voters. So we don't have the usual 30-day referendum. The first week of September, these must be given to the county for inclusion on the general election ballot in November. So I think that's Friday, September 4th. So that's why we have to have these, our drop dead date to get these approved by the city council would be August 24th. But again, to give ourselves a little bit of wiggle room, it would probably be better to have these on second reading on August 10th.
Okay. So if we were to hit those, your ideal timeframes, August 10th, Mayor and our Kathy Hodgson, are there dates in there that you think you would be able to fit us in with an executive council?
We're already scheduled for July 27th and as first reading and August 10th for second.
Right.
That's right. That's right, Councilor Ryan.
But is there a time frame in somewhere in there that we could sneak an executive session in there so that we have enough time to be able to hit those dates? It sounded like there needs to be an executive session if we're to move this next one forward. And so the question is, how much time does council need to study this issue and be ready for an executive session? And when would there be a calendar date in which we could have an executive session to discuss this?
I can answer that, Councilor Ryan. We can have an executive session, or the soonest one we can have, if we align those with Mondays, the soonest one would be July 13th. Before our workshop. We've got West Metro Fire coming in before the regular meeting. So we would schedule this one at 5 and then have the fire department workshop at 6 and then the regular meeting at 7. So that's July 13th. If you want to wait until July 20th, which is the following Monday, we have an LRA meeting at 6. So it's kind of the same pattern. We can have this executive session at 5 on the 20th, LRA at 6, and then our study session at 7. So those are two dates right off the top. that are in advance of first reading on July 27th.
Okay. Ms. McKinney Brown, are you ambivalent to either of those dates? Or do you have a preference if we were to do something like that? I'm not saying we're going to, I'm just asking if we were, do you have a preference? You're muted if you're trying to talk. And if the...
Okay.
Yeah.
I keep taking it off mute and it puts itself back on. So if I fall off, tell me again.
Okay.
I would prefer July 13th because if City Council at the end of the July 13th meeting wanted to direct staff to create this fifth ordinance, we would still have time to create it and bring it forth for first reading with the rest on the 27th.
Okay. I'll leave that to the powers that be. Councilor Nystrom, I know you've been waiting patiently, but I'm going to go to Mayor Strom, if I may, to hear her thoughts.
I'm fine to wait till after Councilor Nystrom and Logo.
Okay, great. Councilor Nystrom.
Is there a Councilor Logo on here now?
Councilor Lowe, yes.
Yeah, I just, in terms of this, I think we need to like take a deep breath and take a step back. I know people are still litigating this thing on Lakewood Speaks and all of that. I think generally speaking, this is something we really need to get more educated about and think thoroughly through before talking about voting on it. And, there was people alluded to, feedback and people do have a voice and all those things. Well, that's exactly what they felt like they didn't have during the zoning vote. So I want, like, I think an after action report and after implementation report, whatever you want to call it, we need to do some analysis here. And then we need to figure out the vehicles for outreach before we start talking about changing the rules around referendums and initiatives. Just my 2 cents, but it's a cautionary tale.
Thank you. Councilor Lowe.
I'm happy for the mayor to go first if she wants to.
You guys are too deferential. Come on, let's hear it.
I mean, I guess I do actually, I genuinely hear what Councilor Nystrom is saying, and I think her feedback is well taken. I think there's a serious counter argument here, right? Which is it puts the city in a really, really challenging situation when the state is telling us one thing and there are really sort of very material, legal consequences or budgetary consequences associated with state law. And on the other hand, it sort of puts us in between a rock and a hard place. At a minimum, my preference would be that we move this forward for now, right? That we get ready to put this on a first reading, that we ask the city attorney to sort of do the due diligence to like make sure that this language is ready to go, that we discuss it in exec session, that we plan to have that discussion. And then, let's do another month of stakeholding. Second reading, it sounds like won't be till August 10th. So that gives us, 2 more months to hear from constituents on this. And then we can have a debate about whether we're sending this to the voters like at second reading once we have the benefit of like more legal advice, more stakeholding. My strong preference though would be to keep this one in the mix and not sort of prematurely like kill it off, because I think this one is quite potentially important. And I think it's at a minimum it's worthy of like a full debate at a second reading.
Mayor.
Thank you. Kind of fun to be over here on this side. So 22 years it has been since the last update to our charter. For anybody that's wondering, I just pulled out the dates. And as it was mentioned by Councilor Sinks earlier in the meeting, we have many communities around us that make it an ongoing occurrence, whereas when things need to be changed, they bring it forward. It's usually, 2 or 3. It's not a ton. We've already just signaled that we're interested in 4 different amendments. So we're talking about 5. So we need to be cognizant of the number because, I kind of skipped over it and maybe didn't spend as much time on the details at the top of our meeting. But every single one of these is going to be on our ballot in November as a standalone thing. So if we put forward all 5, we're looking at 5 different things. And in addition to the rest of the ballot, and that's a pretty long ballot for our voters. So I do think that we do have a lot of, a number of things that we want to kind of suss through on this. This is one that if we're talking about overturning a law that then puts us in complete conflict with the state, I understand, that is a challenge too. There are definitely a lot of things to talk through on this. And maybe the answer is, we learn a little bit more now, and this one can be ready for us for next year. But I can appreciate, I don't feel like we need to rush to do 5 because this is a lot in any one year anyway. So for me, this is easy if we're looking at a number of them and we're trying to prioritize what we want to get through onto the ballot this year, then this one's easy to say, let's slow it down a little bit and let's learn a little bit. And then we move forward at a more comfortable pace for what's coming in from community too.
Good. Councillor Sinks.
Yeah, thank you. I also appreciate the comments of Councillor Nystrom, and she said education, and then that's right up my alley. So I think that the July 13th executive session does just that, gives us more of an education on this, helps us learn more, and then we can decide how to move forward on it. So I would really like to see us have an executive session at 5 o'clock on the 13th of July. Doesn't mean that we'll then move it forward. By the way, we had some office hours, and I appreciated a comment from someone that came in that said, yeah, during ward meetings, we need to talk about the rationale for these charter changes. And so we've had this robust discussion, and let's continue that robust discussion, whether it means we send it on to the ballot or not. At least we will have laid a good foundation. So thank you.
Well, we're letting other Councillor Ide-Cruz.
I was about to pivot, so I will.
No, that's so I was just going to say, I mean, I appreciate the mayor's comments, and I would agree that if I was to prioritize these, this would probably not be my top one in terms of cleanup. But with that said, I'm curious enough to hear what the legal counsel might tell us in executive session. We may be, we may be advised, maybe we need to work on the language on this one a little bit, or maybe it's like, no, this is great. You got the language is dead on. That doesn't mean it will necessarily move it to approval, but at least, as Councillor Sink said, get an education as to whether this makes sense or not. That would just be my 2 cents on that one, because despite our efforts to see if we could consolidate a couple of these into one and not overwhelm folks, and despite efforts to only keep it to 3, we ended up going to 5 to you. So I think that's the mayor's comments, I think, are helpful in that regard, but I would like to see a little bit more. So pivot away, Councillor Ide-Cruz.
Thank you. My comment's not going to help with what you were just sharing, so apologies for that. And I know, and I do want to respect that I was not on the group, so I recognize that. I'm sure that you all put a lot of conversation into the prioritization of these that I wasn't aware of. But I did just want to raise from, in me looking at all these pieces, from the number of special elections from vacancies on council we've seen in the last few years, that's a major expenditure of city resources and our voters' time in a way that I think should be dealt with sooner rather than later. And so to me, honestly, that would be a larger priority than probably this one. Maybe arguably the other ones, although I really support them and think that they are pretty innocuous cleanups for the most part. So I just wanted to put that on the table as somebody who wasn't on the committee. Again, respect and appreciate all of the work you did. And I think that that's an issue where we're an outlier amongst a lot of our peers who have an appointment process when there's a vacancy so close to an election. And we just saw kind of last year the amount of expense and effort that went into that. So just figured that I would raise that since I haven't had the venue to yet. Yes.
Councillor Lowe.
As is so often the case, Councillor Cruz said it better and more succinctly than I can, but I will give a big +1 to that. I also am very cognizant that I was not on the charter committee and a lot of hours went into that. I want to respect that process, and I appreciate the folks that invested that time. And I do agree. I totally agree with what Councillor Cruz just said. I do think the vacancy process has created some cost, some very low turnout special election. If there was a way to put in place some sort of temporary appointment provision, as other cities have, I do think that would be. I think there's a strong argument that that's a pretty big priority in terms of prioritizing a limited number of charter amendments.
Councillor Sinks.
Thank you. Could we see that on the screen? I know you had a little.
That's the Councillor. I'm sorry, Mr. Robb. It's the last slide.
Topics not considered, and because of the LAC doing some work on it, we didn't prioritize it, wanting to honor the work that they're doing. But I wonder if we have a date when they might be finished, number one. And number two, I also wonder if that could be, if 2.8 could be added to a discussion that we might have July 13th, where we wouldn't just talk about 13.2, but we could also add 2.8 to see any legalities surrounding this, because it is a point well taken that that it has cost a lot. So thank you.
Councillor Nystrom.
Yeah, I just wanted to call out, I just looked back at Lakewood Speaks. There was a comment added at 7 p.m. that we have not given consideration to, but we keep dancing around this issue, but in terms of the zoning vote, we did go above and beyond what the state requirement was. And so that's another instance where it could trigger an initiative petition in the future. And if we take that right away, that's again impacting that democratic process.
Well, I'm going to just push back just a little bit on that based on what we heard from our legal counsel, is that if we are adding extra sauce to the state law, then this would not, it would not apply, right? The referendum could still move forward. And so I think the number of times a city council would adopt a state law without putting any of their own imprint on there, I think would be remarkably low. Just guessing, I'm sure every city council has their own dynamics, but as our city councilor said, if we, or legal counsel, just not confuse things, if we don't adopt the state law pretty close to strict wording, we may have difficult. I don't think this subsection A would apply. But going back to the vacancy piece, I agree that this is one of the more troubling ones, and I think if we had had more time, we would have eagerly tackled that. But having 2 months and being able to get time from various staff, short of just looking up what 2 or 3 or 5 different cities are doing and say, let's pick this one, without going into the what problems does this lead to? Are there any unintended consequences? Having more robust feedback with our public constituents. The time frame we didn't feel that worked. Now, obviously all of you could say, no, we still think we should move it forward, and can come forward with some language to say, I think we should do a charter amendment on vacancy, and here's the language I want to go forward with. Certainly a possibility. We just, as a body, didn't feel like we had the time to properly get that done in the 2 months essentially that we had. But if folks here say, we want to move forward with do the vacancy thing, and let's get to work on it, I'm sure we can figure something out. Yeah, Councilor I-Cruz.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to the other members of the committee, Councilor Sink as well, who weighed in on this consideration. Again, I totally respect that. I think that that's well reasoned. And I wonder if there is a way to kind of check on some of the timing of this with the LAC, and also to see if there's a way of getting a good enough section together. I just am cognizant that this is going to be the election that the most probably voters are going to vote in of Lakewood for until the next presidential until the next presidential election. I guess that's 2 years. That's not a long time, but at the rate we've gone in the last couple of years, that's still going to be like a couple $100,000 in the hole, and less attended elections than I think is representative of everybody's community. So I would potentially argue to keep this in consideration for what we put on the ballot. If other folks think it's not fast enough to be reasoned, or it's too fast to be reasoned well, then that's fine. But that would be my vote, and appreciate the thoughtfulness put into this so far.
Yeah, no, and your reasoning is not quibbling with your reasoning. This is a very important issue, and it's certainly one that I think all of us would love to tackle. Before we go too far afield on this, let's go back to the 13.2A, on whether a referendum that incorporates, or for the limited purpose of adopting a state law, do we want to move forward with at least hearing more discussion from legal counsel at an executive session? Or do we want to say, you know what, that's enough, we'll tackle that another day, because there's already enough things, and maybe vacancies is one of those things. So let's do it. Unless there's more discussion, can we just have oh, yes, Councilor Black.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to weigh on that, but it sounds like you're going to do a vote. So
no,
wait, my comment.
Weigh in, please.
I was just going to quickly say, it seems like there's a lot of questions and a lot of confusion around this one in particular. For what I'm hearing might not be a rather large impact. You yourself, and I think so intelligently, just said that most municipalities change at least some small part of a state law, and that you've seen in this body that it's been rare that the state law has been adopted just completely as is. So it seems like potentially the amount of effort that we're putting into weighing this versus the amount of reward or risk that we're going to take on might not be worth it. And perhaps it would leave a bit more time to shift towards some of the other counselors. I think really intelligent comments about the other opportunity that we might have around special elections for counselors who step down from the dais during a non-election period. So that's just my thought on that.
Good. So let me okay. I'll get you, Councilor Sinks. When we vote, I'm gonna rephrase it as, do we want to table this for further discussion for the charter committee, or do we want to move it forward? So whether we would table it, if we don't, then it would move forward now. If we do table it, then it's for future discussion. Does that make sense? Did I just confuse things? I'm good at that. So the thought is, do we want to move? I don't want to say we don't want to have further discussions on it ever again, but for now, for this let's say for this ballot year, that we would table that and have further discussions with the future charter commissions should they so choose. So is that clear as mud?
Clear as mud. If I could just clarify, a yes vote would be no, we're not going to discuss it at an executive session.
Right.
So that's a little confusing. So could we just change it that a yes vote means yes, we'll discuss it.
Okay.
And
let's do that.
No vote means no, we won't discuss it.
Yes, I overthought it. Okay. So yes vote or no vote? Councillor Icruz and Councillor Black, which way are we going?
I'm so sorry to make this even longer. I'm a little confused still. If I vote yes, we're tabling it regardless. But if I vote yes, we're tabling it and
No. So do we want to have it go forward with this ballot issue or for this ballot year or not? So if you do want to have it for this ballot year, vote yes. If you don't,
hang on. Point of information: isn't the vote to discuss it further in an executive session? And a yes vote is yes. We want to get more information in an executive session. A no vote is no. Let's table it indefinitely. Right.
Right. For future city council, for future charter commission can bring it up again at some point. Right. But not now. It wouldn't. Okay.
Is somebody? I can't see all the thumbs. Can someone?
Can someone unshare?
Oh, right there. Thank you, Mayor.
Three yes, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 no. 3 yes and 7 no.
Okay.
Thank you, Kathy.
So moving to the vacancy, we'll figure out we'll figure out the logistics, but just the idea of, do we want to see if we can try and jam something in, get something back to you guys to consider in terms of language for vacancy appointments before our various deadlines in July? Councillor Sinks.
Yeah, thank you.
And I know that was not
Chair.
artfully worded, sorry.
No. So if I understand this correctly, would it have applied? It wouldn't have applied to when Rebecca Stewart was reelected, because she finished in November, and 90 days there wouldn't have been an election. So we wouldn't have saved any money if we would have had this ordinance. I think Rich Olver, when he dropped off the council, he dropped off at the end of the year, so it wouldn't have saved any money there either. And so while we think it might save tons of money, if the election is not within 90 days, it's not going to save us any money. Same thing with sometimes counselors move on, to the state house or whatever, and they don't know until November or December. And once again, it wouldn't save us any money. So thus, how high priority is this? Because we're not saving a lot of money, because it's all a timing thing. Do I understand that right?
Hold on to that thought. I think we may hear from Councillor Icruz might address some of that, and then we'll circle back, because I think you raised some very interesting points.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong from what you all were discussing, but there is no requirement that we have 90 days. Other cities have requirements that if it's within a year, or there's other stipulations. So I think that I would be in favor of us moving forward with something not within the last year we ran 2 elections for the same people in the same year. That to me doesn't feel very democratic, nor very a good use of our time and resources. And so I would I would maybe argue for within a year until the next annual regular election. But again, as was stated earlier, a lot of different municipalities do it differently. So I understand why we might want to do some research, but to me, at least, there would be ways to save money.
Yes, keep it going.
Could we see the frame again? Because I think it does reference 90 days, and I'm not saying that it has to reference, it has to be 90 days. It's just that's call a special election within 90 days of the effective date, within 90 days. So we would need legal counsel to help us write something so that we're not limited to the 90 days.
Well, I think if from my perspective, we would need to see what are some of the options that others have done, whether there's an option that some of the others haven't done. As our legal counsel said, sometimes we manage to do something very creative, like on, and so we would need to decide as a committee what are the maybe two best options that we would see as being viable. Get that back to City Council to consider one or both of those options, and hopefully one or both of those options are something that Council can coalesce around. And that all has to happen by, well, before July 13th. Before July 27th. July 20th, 27th. Somewhere in there. Not impossible. We can do it. The question is, do we want to? Our committee can do whatever you guys direct us to. We will do it, and you will be amazed, astounded, and proud. Councilor K. Cruz.
Yeah, I think for this specifically, I'm definitely supportive of continuing the conversation. The fiscal argument is real in regards to special elections, to the point where it's 90 days or to a year. I think that's something worth us having a conversation and allowing the voters to make the decision. So that's something I'm supportive of continuing the conversation for this item.
Okay. Mayor Strom, or just Mayor.
Yeah, thank you. This is a very valuable conversation to have, but I will say I feel rushed in this, and I don't feel like we've got the time to get community input on something. We intentionally, as a committee, wanted to work on cleaning up some things that would be a little bit less emotionally charging to get the ball rolling on some of this. And this one, I don't feel like stays in alignment with that. There's a lot of emotion. I mean, money is important. I totally get that. But at the same time, I prefer, I'll be a no vote on this for this year, but I think that this is a very, very important one for us to be talking about in next year's iteration of what changes we bring forward on the ballot in 2027.
Councilor Nystrom.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I support what the mayor just said as well, but I mean, if the majority wants to move it forward, I'm good with that. I would just really be, and I totally respect Councilor I. Cruz's opinion, but I would definitely be hesitant of leaving a seat open for a year so that we could time it with another election. I just think that's, in the event of a very controversial vote or something, you have a ward that's not adequately represented. So just my 2 cents there.
I don't think there's a thought that a seat would go vacant for a year. There would have to be some other process that would be in place to fill that in lieu of a special election until the regular election took place, if I'm understanding some of the comments from other councilors. Yeah. Councilor Lowe.
Yeah, not to feed a fed horse, but I guess it's worth worth just saying one more time as we debate this. Because the comment was just made like, well, we can refer some of these consequential changes to to the ballot next year. I just want to remind folks, like, turnout in the November 2027 election, based on historical patterns, will be around like 40% of Lakewood voters. Turnout in the November 2026 election is probably going to be closer, based on historical patterns, to 75%. So I mean, there's just a huge difference in terms of the universe of people that are going to get to. I mean, we're the difference between sending. So for a charter amendment change that is important, consequential, and possibly a little bit, substantive, and folks have strong opinions on, I gotta say, I would much rather have it be decided in an election where 75% of people are voting than 40% of people are voting. I think that's really important. I really think that needs to be part of our calculus in terms of what we're thinking about referring this year versus next year. Councilor Cruz already made that point, so I'm just bringing it up again. But I just wanted to kind of put 2 exclamation points on that.
Consider that horse fed. What other comments? This is great discussion. Okay, do we want to move forward with the charter committee putting together what I'd propose is that we put, well, we don't have to get so as you would say, prescriptive. Charter committee coming back to council in some fashion with a recommendation, or do we want to have city council members or member just draft something up and we discuss it from there? Can we have that discussion? Do you want the charter committee to take a stab at this? I'm seeing some bobbleheads. Yeah. Councilor Cruz.
I was just going to say, happy to defer to your leadership as chair.
I'm taking direction from all of you. Councilor Kate Cruz, we will do the people's work.
Yeah, just clarifying, wasn't there a comment that the LAC is already working on something like this?
Yeah, yes.
Them first.
Well, there was some thought to get some of their input, given this time frame. Maybe we get something, maybe we don't. We'll check in with them, see what they can share. Maybe they're not ready for giving us their recommendation, but maybe they've done some background work that could be helpful that we could use. In either case, we will, if you'd like the charter committee to make a recommendation with respect to this topic, we will do so. So that's what I can commit to you. Okay, and it doesn't look like there's more discussion. I will note that we went through the first 4 in like 20 minutes. So, it's these last ones. So, but these are the tough ones. And so I appreciate the discussion. This is really helpful. If you would like the charter committee to come back to city council and recommend or make recommendations with respect to vacancy appointments, give us a thumbs up. If no, give us a thumbs down.
Seven yes, and 1, 2. I think 3 no's. I only see. Oh,
that's what I have.
Yeah, 3 no's. 7
Same.
yes, 3 no's.
Great. Thanks, Kathy.
Okay. So we will come back to you with some discussion there. That is all that I have. I think, yes, that is all that I have. Thank you for the guidance.
Thank you, Councilor Ryan. And one thing before we move on from our first topic item this evening on charter amendments, I do want to bring forward to council the conversation last month. I was asked by one of our community members that we consider an additional amendment that I wanted to mention tonight. This has not been noticed. It's not something that we've had the opportunity to discuss in public yet. So what I'm going to do is just share some details about it. and then a little bit more on how, if anybody wants to move forward with discussion on this point. But one amendment that was brought forward for consideration last month was one that is with regards to what would be called large scale zoning. It would be an added section of 9.4 to Article 9. Within that, it's talking specifically about large scale zoning, which is defined as a zoning action that's being taken that would affect greater than 10% of our residentially zoned parcels here in Lakewood, or that applies to multiple neighborhoods or zoning districts. So like that's the element. If it is greater than 10% or applying to multiple neighborhoods or zoning districts, these things would apply. And it's all things that are done. The idea is to ensure that these large rezonings are done with transparency and opportunities for public input along the way. And that includes requiring at least three public meetings on 3 separate dates, would require a mailed notice that be sent to all property owners within the affected area, no less than 90 days prior to the public hearing. In addition to the other notifications that we do on regular city channels as well. And then the final primary element of it would be that any of those large scale zoning requirements would require an affirmative vote of 2/3 of the city council in order to actually be voted. So instead of 50% or just a simple majority, it would be 2/3 of a vote. So I'll just recap it. So for large scale rezoning changes defined by 10% or more of residentially zoned parcels or multiple neighborhoods or zoning districts, that there would be a requirement for those that would include 3 public meetings on 3 separate dates with notices mailed out to property owners at least 90 days prior to the public meeting, and then also the addition of making these available or posting them on regular city channels. And then again, any large scale zoning would require an affirmative vote of the 2/3 of the city council in order for it to be passed. So like I said, we're not going to talk about this tonight because this was not specifically noticed, but I did want to bring forward the topic to let you all know that this is something that can be discussed. If any counselor would like to bring this forward as a zoning related amendment to the charter, we can certainly talk about that. I would say just let me know. And as we talked about earlier tonight, the first reading on the ordinances that we've talked about already this evening would be on July 22nd with second reading following on August 10th. So that is all that we have as far as charter updates go. So Mr. Clerk, do you want to read our next item into the record?
Let's see. Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I believe it's item 4, council discussion on zoning.
All right, perfect. So you'll get me for a minute again. So, I mean, everybody watching, I'm sure tonight knows that we just got past a special election on April 7th. We have a zoning code, a large zoning code. The last time that the zoning code was updated was in 2012. The bulk of 2025 was spent by council. Before that, started definitely as the comp plan and the process in 2024, then led into the zoning process through most of 2025, and lots of updates were included with that. Well, the voters showed up on April 7th and said, nope, we want to do some things differently. So what we've been doing is over the last, we'll call it, well, it's a little bit more than 2 months now, is many of our city councilors, myself included, have been having a lot of community conversations. What were your experiences? What were your thoughts? What are we thinking as far as what we, moving forward? And so, the last 2 months has been a lot of work and talk with lots of different stakeholders to start to try to shape what that would look like. And so tonight's conversation is really meant to be the genesis of us taking or creating that shape as we're getting together with, not 11 of us, but 10 of us, as we've got one counselor that's missing this evening, and coming back with all of our thoughts and experiences. And then we will tonight take the first step into the process of starting to bring these elements forward for community consideration and city council consideration. So over the last few weeks, probably 5-6 weeks now, city manager and I have sat down with each and every single city councilor to have a conversation about their unique experiences throughout the zoning process and through the special election. And that was done to make sure that we got, equal playing field of every single voice that comes to the table. Everybody is important in this conversation. And so I want to, first of all, thank each of our city councilors for coming in and sitting down with us. And Ms. Hodson, thank you so much that was a lot of hours, but it was definitely it was good time that was spent to be able to sit down and speak candidly with each other about, the challenges and the less challenging things and how we feel as we want to move forward. So with that, everybody that's watching, there's public comments, yes, that are going on lakewood-speaks.org, but I want to mention that on lakewood-speaks.org, if you go to that website and select tonight's meeting and select the zoning topic, there are a couple of different things in there that will be interesting for everyone to see. The first is a staff memo that talks about where we are, but separately, we have an executive summary that was put together as a product of all of these 11 conversations. So the executive summary is designed to kind of elevate what might be some of the bigger themes or the consistencies that counselors were bringing forward as we were having some of these conversations. And so, really important, I think, for community to see that the themes, some of the 4 top themes that came out of those were really a strong desire to preserve existing neighborhood character, a process that's related to process and trust issues that were part of that process, that there is an appetite for incremental and not comprehensive change. And each one of these has more supporting information within it, but just, for the sake of, knowing not everybody wants to listen to me talk for a long time, including myself. And then support for targeted growth in corridors and transit areas. So those are 4 of the common themes that came up in our conversations. So I want to point out that means that, process and trust issues came out probably in every single conversation. Same as understanding a strong desire to preserve existing neighborhood character, appetite for incremental change, things like that. We also discussed within those questions where we might all see possibilities for common ground. And with that, we heard, things like, ADUs and duplexes looking, again, incremental changes came up. Easier communication, better communication, easier to understand. Zoning is complicated, even for those people that really understand. I'll say personally, I don't know how many hours I put in last year, but it was a lot of work to really get up to really understanding some of these very big and very complicated things. And we want to do better, making sure that as we're rolling some of this out, that we're making it in a more understandable format. So as a conclusion, I'm just going to read this part of what's on the sheet. Everything else, if you want to go to Lakewood Speaks, you can see the details. But in conclusion, council members were aligned on the need to repair trust, improve transparency, and take a phased, community-centered approach to zoning reform. Residents are not opposed to affordable or new housing, but they expect clarity about where it belongs, how it integrates with neighborhood character, and how the city will safeguard environmental and infrastructure constraints. Incremental change, stronger communication, and visible community engagement are essential to moving forward. So that document is on Lakewood Speaks. But I wanted to use that to kind of set the stage as we have this conversation that we're going to move forward tonight. I'll speak for just a second on the trust and the communication. So tonight, we are here specifically to address the zoning elements. We are definitely looking at trust. We are definitely looking at communication. We want to make sure that we are doing better with both, but those are not the topics for tonight's conversation. Tonight's conversation is, okay, now what? How do we move forward addressing housing and zoning in our community? And so with that, before we go in, I've got, we mentioned like some common ground areas that we see. So we'll come back after we give each counselor the opportunity to speak and share their experience and their thoughts. And what we will do is kind of coalesce after everybody's got the opportunity to speak. Then we'll come back to what are the 6 elements that we see as kind of that higher priority first as we move forward on addressing these zoning changes. So we're planning to be done tonight with identifying 6 particular things to task staff with looking at what changes could we make or how we break up this, that, and everything else. But before we get on to that, what I want to do is go ahead and open the floor to anyone that would like to, per our Bob's Rules of Order, we have up to 5 minutes. So anybody wants up to 5 minutes to say any of their thoughts with regards to anything related to zoning. And I will just wait if, everybody, raise your hand if you want to speak. We'll just give everybody a couple minutes. Really? All right, Dave, you started some kind of a trend. How did this happen?
I was, the reason I didn't raise my hand right away is it's a heavy lift. That's a lot to be thinking through. So I'm trying to actually think it through. So I'm glad some folks have raised their hand. But yes, I put them to sleep for you.
I thought you said, yeah. All right, so we'll go with Councillor Furman and then Councillor LeBure.
And I will do my best not to take 5 minutes. But obviously, closer to the actual April vote, there was a lot of interaction even then. And then there's been individual interaction, and it's been a topic that has come up multiple times in ward meetings and in separate individual meetings. And while there's a mix of opinions, right, there's some people who, on both sides of this, who have reached out. The concern, the one thing that I heard actually from both sides is that we need to do better at reaching out. The people who obviously supported the zoning changes see the reality that we needed to get more messaging out sooner because of there continues to be, a belief that people got bad information or didn't get the best information, and it was hard to undo that. And so I will say, and I know this isn't about zoning, this is about messaging, and so I'll quickly get to zoning, but I will say a big piece of this is about how we find new and better ways to communicate and to collaborate with the community to try and get this kind of thing done. I will say on the zoning, I think the other message here is that the whole city approach seemed to bring out different issues. And even if you imagine that we were going to get to some place like that at some point, the reality is it brought out different issues in each ward, and it became a different kind of conversation with different concerns. And so I think the approach of more tactical conversations and addressing where some of these things make the most sense seems to be one of those pieces that's critically important. I do think we are going to have some of the people in the community who still say they don't want to see any changes. But at the same time, I think we have that piece of reality, which is they still have concerns like so many people do about things that we need to address. And so it's a matter of what are the changes that are going to be most impactful and are going to benefit the things that most of us can agree we want to achieve. And that middle market housing for sale is still a goal that I think a lot of people would like to see happen. And how do we do that in a more tactical way that doesn't impact the concerns that people had? It is going to take some time to figure out. I think part of it is to begin to create some of the pieces in our zoning that will allow us to do it. I mean, one of the biggest issues we had was the mapping. And so a big piece may be that we create some zones that will allow us to work with communities and neighborhoods where things make sense, because perhaps we're missing some of the zones, making some of the adjustments that people can universally agree to. I know there continues to be concern about things like I think it was the mixed use employment district not ever working quite right. And so I think there's things we can still tackle that will work towards addressing the middle market housing without impacting the single family neighborhoods that people are sort of most concerned with. But it is going to take communication and sort of new ways of reaching out to get to a place where we get the information out in a way that is understandable first. And that followed through all the way to the ballot. As we know, there were people on both sides of this issue that were frustrated with the ballot. And so I don't know how we get to a place where we provide better information on that more widely. So I didn't speak to anything specific other than the idea of providing some new zoning that can be used in a tactical way without having to go and change maps. But I think there's efforts like that still make sense, that a lot of people will still support. So figuring out what that looks like.
Thank you. Councilor LeBeer.
Thank you, Mayor. To Councilor, maybe Ryan's first point is I didn't raise my hand immediately because it's a lot to unpack and how to move the zoning stuff forward. And I won't do it very good justice, I'm sure, trying to give you six specific things on how to move it forward. But, I will say, I had previous discussions with our planning director, Parker, and I do believe there were a lot of sort of process oriented, administrative type things within that zoning law that I think weren't actually controversial at all. That I certainly think are probably low hanging fruit. And I think there are probably some other low hanging fruit items, buried somewhere in the zoning law that I don't have pulled up right now to really point out. But so I just mentioned that. And then, not to really tackle the trust and confidence issue, but I do think that is a necessary component of really even having this conversation, is that I do think, however you want to do it, but of course I sent an email, to you all outlining what I thought that would probably look like to get some sort of effective process to move these things forward. And I mentioned either some sort of committee or some sort of community discussions that were ongoing, where people could engage, maybe not so dissimilar from what Councilor Cruz did in his own ward, but something that was, more broad and really was citywide, whether that was a committee or like a development dialogue committee that we used to have in the past, or whether that was, sort of ongoing council discussions, supported with staff. That was kind of my suggestion, a way to kind of move these things forward and unpack the different, components of the zoning. So not sure how helpful that commentary is, but that's my general view. And maybe as the discussion unfolds, I'll think of some more genius ideas to bring to the table.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Ken Cruz and Councilor I. Cruz.
Yes. I just want to say first and foremost, for anyone watching, thank you for attending. Myself, my co-councilor Roger Lowe, and Chair the Planning Commission, Stephen Buckley. We had a listening tour. It was very insightful to find out that a lot of community, both voting yes and no, want to find that common ground from that discussion. There were a lot of individuals who voted yes, and said that there was a lot of good in the zoning code. So I want to make sure that we start the conversation there, that there was things that we can agree on in the zoning code. I would say one of the biggest factors that I heard among community members that voted yes was, how do we go back to Envision 2040, right? The map on Envision Lakewood, I think it's page 161, right? That map looked a lot different from the zoning map that we we pushed for the election. So I think one of the biggest things and recommendations that I would have based off of community input is going back to Envision 2040 and that map specifically. A lot of individuals thought that that was a good map, especially all the individuals that helped work to create that map from the community members who voted yes and no. I think another thing, that was brought up, a constituent, sent an email this morning in regards to bringing back the Citizens Academy. I think that would be definitely a huge factor and beneficial to offer more education. Obviously, we talked about trust and engagement, but I think education also has to be a component of how we move forward. So whether it's introducing that academy ahead of time, and I saw that staff, already said that there's some things that are being worked on, but I think that's another huge component that is needed moving forward. One of the biggest things that I think would be even better is, we're in 2026. There's so much technology out there that can help, community engage a lot easier. So when we're sending out reference documents or maps, being able to link that directly to the current zoning code map, making it easier for people to see what those differences are. I know, in prior conversations, we've talked about a blue book. I think that was a key component that just was missing this past election. So I would say, Envision 2040 was a common ground thing, not bringing back, but making sure that we're being intentional on education, traceability on documents, so that community members can go back and forth in between what's being proposed and what we currently have. I would say is probably what I would like to put down tonight.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Icruz.
Thank you, and thanks to all of the work that you all put into listening and to all the process that has got us to this point. Just echoing that, I think the like what are the six is a bit of a big question, and maybe I'm echoing a little bit of the sentiment of there's a couple of different pieces within that I think have like different amounts of work and should be led by different processes, perhaps. So I think that from all of what we've heard, right, I think that there were a lot of this vote meant a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and a lot of people didn't show up to this vote either. And so how do we kind of move forward with all of those constituencies and all of the ideas that moved forward from there? And so I think that there are some pieces of, that were procedural in the updates, obviously some based in state law. And to me, I think it makes sense to prioritize some of those procedural things, some of the state law things, and also just some of the things that we've heard pretty wide consensus on to start. And then to me, I think that going back, since it seems like one of the main themes, and even from people of both sides, as has been mentioned, right, is a challenge around process. And I think, a missed opportunity that many folks have continued to go back to is that the great advisory committees really worked on a comprehensive plan, worked on a conceptual zoning plan, but didn't work on the meat and potatoes of what we got. And I think that put us in a really different position. And so is there an opportunity with moving forward these conversations, kind of connecting the dots of what a couple of my colleagues have said, to bring our constituents along in the process of setting the agenda on some of those bigger ticket items? So I think I guess I'll just split it into those two. There are some things that I do think we can get moving on sooner rather than later. Again, some of those state requirements, as I think close to the state piece as possible to make sure that we are in compliance. I think also I heard pretty wide support for pieces around trees and tree preservation. I think that's something that we're missing, that a lot of other cities have gotten right before we're starting the conversations about zoning. And I think that's something that I've heard from a lot of different sides that should be prioritized. There were some changes on the map and in kind of writing about car-centered uses, particularly along Colfax, that I think are important for us to go back to. And I think with our renewed focus on Colfax, that might be an area to focus on. There were slot home changes, some changes to residential business, adaptive reuse that I think largely people were pretty excited about. And I think there were just also some updates in the map that weren't part of this broader conversation about changing to form-based zoning, but were supposed to happen sort of in the procedural every 15 years were changing. And so I know you all have heard from Mr. Theander and from some other folks. And so I would like to go back to those as well. And then honestly, even beyond maybe the development dialogue conversation, or I think the listening roundtables that y'all have been doing are great. And to that point that you were raising, Councillor Ken Cruz, on education, I think some other municipalities have been using kind of a model called a civic assembly that I think would be really interesting for us to explore. Obviously, that would be an investment, and I think we would have to talk about that a little bit more, but it's a way to think about how to get a representative swath of the community, not just people who have the ability and the wherewithal to come to public meetings, to go through an intensive education process and kind of come forth with a recommendation on hard issues in a way that I think really gets to the heart of what all of our democratic values are, and on moving forward what we would all want as a community. Because the last thing I would want is for us to continue to be this kind of doom circle of the people who are most motivated to show up are people who with really strong opinions on either side, and there's a lot of people we're not hearing from right now who are mostly affected by these housing affordability issues. So I think that's my piece, and doubling down on sort of, I think that there's a process element to some of those bigger conversations I'd like to continue to change.
Thank you. Councillor Ryan.
I swear I'm all thumbs sometimes. I really don't have, excuse me, too much to add to what's already been said, so I could have taken my hand down. One of the things that I thought we could do, excuse me, during the comprehensive planning, we convened advisory committees of citizens on different topics. And I think we could make use of something like that in addition to all of these things, right? I don't think any of the things that have been discussed are to the exclusion of any of the other things that can build upon those things. And I agree with Councillor I. Cruz. There's a considerable amount, I think, in what we worked on that is not controversial. Right, like a bulk plane rule, things to protect our parks, bird safety glass. I don't think the vote to repeal this was in any way a reflection of some of those. I think we pretty well all know that it was the low form zoning aspect of it. So how do we address the controversial pieces, I think, is through some of these community discussion pieces, whether they're the convening of what Kay Cruz has done so fantastically well in gathering community feedback on any number of different issues, having a formal convening of different topics that all kind of work together, but maybe are separate, like we did on the comprehensive plan. I think that could all work together. And then having larger committee meetings based on what we learn from those other aspects. But in the meantime, we look at some of the things that are not controversial and take one ordinance at a time. Hey, here's parks. Here's some things that we think will help protect our parks. Here's a different topic that's all related, and have some of those as well. So.
Councillor Nystrom.
Oops, sorry. I didn't, having a little technical difficulty. Yeah, so obviously some comments have been made already. I definitely think the number one thing that we need to really dive into as quickly as possible is communication, education, dialogue, whatever shape that takes. I mean, I think the Development Dialogue Committee would be a good idea, or the ward advisory committees. And, if everybody in every ward doesn't want to do that, then I'm happy to move forward in our ward. But I really think that that's the key. We have got to rebuild trust, and that's going to take a lot of communication and a lot of respectful and thoughtful engagement with residents. And, to Councilor Kay Cruz's point, the comp plan, that comes up over and over again because, the comp plan 10 years ago, comp plan today has respect neighborhood environment. And that was definitely a sticking point that I've heard repeatedly. So the tie back to the comp plan needs to be tangible to people. I would also say that, we've treated that as more of an aspirational document. The state requirement in terms of the water, do I have it in front of me? Yeah, water supply checklist basically states that, this needs to be aligned with your comprehensive plan, and that needs to be a thoughtful process going forward. And I again, I don't want to beat the drum all day long, but we have a serious drought problem, and there's no indications that that's going to get better. So the concern that people have is that, are we going to have enough water for the people that already live here before we start building more and more density? And, I rode my bike into Bear Creek Lake Park, and I'm happy to share the pictures with you, but that reservoir is lower than I've ever seen it, and it's bad. I guess the saving grace out of all that is the increasing the size of the dam in Bear Creek Park may not happen now because there's not the flow. But anyway, I agree with the comments about tree protections. We need to beef that up, and it needs to be a very thoughtful and comprehensive review. Many municipalities around us have tree protections on private lots or personal, home lots. And we need something like that because we continue to lose mature trees without any checks and balances. And again, if we're going to be building more, we need to take that into account. And, the same thing with parks. I mean, most municipalities in Colorado have their parks designated as green space or parks on their zoning. And that to me is crucial. It'll show a good faith effort with residents that we're conscientious about this. And I think it'd be a big help. And yeah, I mean, a lot of things have already been stated. I think the other piece that, the Sustainability Committee is focused on micromobility as one of our work topics for the work plan. If we are to increase density here, we need some alternatives, and there are programs and grants available to make that happen. But we cannot continue to just add more cars to the road. And as much as everybody would like this to be a less car-centric city and safer for pedestrians and cyclists, if we don't come up with an alternative solution, that's not going to happen. And the more people sit and idle, the worse our ozone and pollution becomes. Yeah, I guess that's about it. I think everybody's, I think almost everyone made a comment about the commercial corridor development that was already zoned according to state law, and maybe we should be focusing on those areas. And yeah, I think that's it. To me, it's 90% of it is communication and education and rebuilding trust and getting people involved that might have typically sat on the sidelines because of processes. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Sinks.
Thank you. Yes, thanks to the mayor and city manager for meeting with all of us and for making a concise summary of what we said, and also to talk about what we've said here tonight. So in my opinion, the the building of trust. And, you know, we all say, yeah, we need to educate. Yeah, we need to get people together. Of course, the devil's in the details. How do you do that? I mean, we thought we were doing it last year, you know, when we open it up at a ward meeting and say who, you know, and nobody has any questions about the zoning or whatever. And so now maybe they will, but you know, it was a hot point. And so in my opinion, maybe people aren't interested in everything. And so if we make it well known that we're going to have a formal convening about, let's say, for example, the bulk plane rule for parks. Everybody loves parks, and maybe that would get the ball rolling where more people will get involved and say, well, hey, what's this all about? So yeah, a formal convening on specific topics, and then pass it, you know, the bulk plane rule that was in the zoning code that was rescinded with the April election. But we start with the low-hanging fruit, as has been mentioned. So we have to identify what that is. You know, the bulk plane rule for parks. I think also the adaptive reuse of empty office buildings. I know somebody was talking to me at a ward meeting and they were going to vote no. And he said, why don't you take these empty office buildings and turn them into apartments? And my comment was, well, that is in the new zoning code, you know, and so that's a common ground. So identify the low-hanging fruit, the common ground, put that out as a formal convening. Here's our topic. And then we hear from constituents. We see what they say about it, all of the input, and pass it. If the input then goes towards, yes, this is what we want. And so just bite-sized chunks all the way. That's how I would recommend that we move forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Counselor. And can you guys still hear me? I'm having some tech issues all of a sudden. Okay, I'm not trying to.
Uh-oh.
1 second. Can you guys still hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, well, while I get my stuff figured out, Counselor Lowe, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mayor. I made a couple of notes to try to control my verbosity on this topic. I really want to thank the mayor and the city manager for the one-page summary they put up. I think it's a really great summary. I encourage residents to who are trying to get a sort of who maybe don't want to listen to this entire discussion to read it. I think it did a really nice job of sort of laying out a couple of key points like in one page. And I really appreciate the mayor and city manager doing these discussions. Councillor Kay Cruz already mentioned the Ward 3 listening session we had. I genuinely thought it was there were some folks that came that gave some really insightful comments. There were a couple of folks that came that were really angry with us, but it was really helpful to just listen, do that for about 2 hours. I did remarkably little talking, and it was just helpful to sort of hear where people were on this topic after the special election. Look, it's no secret. You all know how strongly I felt about some of the policy reforms in this code, and I still think there were a lot of really good, important ideas in what we passed. And I don't apologize for like promoting policies that I believe would have done more than any other lever at our disposal to make housing more affordable. What I think, though, and having had a couple months to reflect on the results of the election, is it's clearly true that I think we despite all the guardrails that we did put in this process and all the public meetings that we had, I think it's the case that we try to go too far too fast in terms of how we were changing some of the rules in residential zoning in Lakewood. One of the flashpoints I think that's emerged as we analyze the election is this question of protecting residential character. So some of my friends that are sort of affiliated more with the YIMBY movement or the progressive left say, well, when you talk about protecting residential character, that's a buzzword for let's keep sort of these policies in place that have a racist origin. And they have a point, like they really do. I get what they're saying. I get why they really, really hate it when we talk about protecting residential character. But for us to move forward, I think we have to accept and understand two truths. Like some of the restrictive things that are baked into sort of conventional Euclidean zoning do have a racist origin. That's true. But setting that point completely aside, like for a ton of people in the city and for a ton of people in suburban communities across the country, frankly, people get really, really, really anxious when city councils talk about changing too many things at once in their residential zoning. And that comes from like a place of good faith. Like a lot of people are saying that not because they are opposed to affordability, but because they get really, really anxious when people talk about changing some of the rules underlying the neighborhoods that they really, really love. And our work, I think, is to understand that like we do need to do more to promote housing affordability, but we do need an approach that respects and protects character of neighborhood. And that's not a buzzword for anything. That's like a reality that we face. And unless we like really embrace that reality, I just think we're going to continue to kind of go in circles rather than actually getting somewhere. So I agree with what's already been said by most. I would sort of give a +1 to most of what I've already heard. I do think there's some low-hanging fruit in terms of stuff we can easily pass. I do think that sort of repackaging some of that into smaller bite-sized pieces that are sort of understandable and not overwhelming to people makes sense. I think there are things where there obviously was widespread support, like just for instance, some of the protections to parks, the bird safe glass provisions that were in the code that Councillor Nystrom strengthened. We shouldn't give up on that. Some of the changes to the enhanced development menu, and yes, we should revisit the tree protection ordinance and get that right. Those are all things we should do. I agree that focusing on figuring out how to really make our corridors in Lakewood thrive. Certainly Colfax. I know there's interest in Colfax. I would just also plug like Sheridan, Wadsworth, Alameda. Like there are some other corridors that I don't want to get lost in that discussion where I think there's the opportunity to see more more thoughtfully planned housing that is hopefully affordable along with green space. The big question for me on that, and it's a really in the weeds question, but it's a really important question to ask staff to look into in terms of next steps is like, what are the actual levers available to us in the zoning code and in the building code and elsewhere that council can change or amend or tweak that are really going to actually encourage the kind of sort of missing middle housing or, naturally sort of market-based, more affordable, attainable housing that I think we all want to see on these corridors. So that I would suggest that is like a really just tactical policy question that I hope our staff and maybe the Planning Commission will have a chance to look into. I don't want us to give up the ghost completely on missing middle housing. I accept and agree that we need to sort of be deliberate, be thoughtful about it, really incorporate the feedback that we've heard over the last year on this. But I made this point during the campaign, and I think it's true, right? Like no one wants us to destroy jobs. Everyone thinks that city council and most elected officials should create jobs. People that have jobs tend to need bedrooms to live in. Those bedrooms can be basically, to simplify, but this is true, they can be one of three places. They can either be really far away from Lakewood, which means a lot of driving and a lot of congestion. And we know our residents don't want like that to be the solution. People can live in very tall apartment buildings or, at least 6 to 12-story apartment buildings. I actually do think there's space for us to do that in a thoughtful, planned way on some of these corridors, as long as it's combined with mixed with ground floor retail and some green space and some dog parks and some trees. But we also know our residents don't want all of that, the answer to just be that. So that really does leave missing middle housing, smaller homes, ADUs, duplexes. But I think the key is to not try to do all of the reforms that we tried to pass all at once citywide and go nearly as far as the code that we passed went. I think there's opportunity to expand ADUs and make them easier to build. I think there's the opportunity to work with water providers in Lakewood, maybe not all of them. There's one or two that really don't seem to want to work with us on this, but I think there's a lot that do to make it easier to build ADUs. I think there's the opportunity to do targeted neighborhood by neighborhood rezoning where appropriate with lots of input and advance notice. And I think there's the opportunity to, with a lot of guardrails, allow, maybe interior ADUs that get brought into the home, or sort of duplexes with a lot of guardrails. One possibility would be like allow a duplex, but like no more than one per city block, which quite frankly, we probably wouldn't get anyway, but like make that explicit so that folks have a lot of confidence that the character of their neighborhood isn't changing. Finally, just in terms of thinking about like what our next steps are, I want to lift up that the Housing Committee has had a really constructive meeting last week where we reviewed a housing affordability fund ordinance. And although there's some really important questions around the timing of that and the revenue source for that interact with the budget committee's work, if we're serious about moving the dial on housing affordability, and we should be, I think creating an affordable housing fund has to be part of the solution. And I'd sort of highly encourage, I think other cities that have figured out a way to make some marginal incremental progress have created a housing affordability fund with a dedicated revenue source. I really think that needs to be part of our approach here in Lakewood. And I hope we'll have an opportunity to figure that out later this year. And finally, I agree with what's been said. Planning Academy, let's somehow create some version of a Lakewood Blue Book so that when we do have these elections, folks have the information and aren't so confused. And everything that Councillor Cruz and Councillor Nystrom and others said about transparency, when we do make changes to the map or code, making those changes like much, much easier for the casual resident to like understand when they visit our website with tools that make these things like really user friendly. Okay, and that was over 5 minutes, but hopefully only by a second. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, everybody go. Oh, Councilor Black, you just moved. Did your hand go up? No, okay. All right, thank you everyone for sharing. And so what the objective is this evening is to figure out I think it's pretty clear through the conversations that we've had in the document, our executive summary, that bubbles up a lot of, or that illustrates a lot of the things that were, I don't know, kind of the collective messaging that came out from folks, that we're doing incremental change. So it seems pretty clear we've got consensus as far as doing something incremental, not bringing back the full code. So for anyone listening, watching, that is not a conversation that we are moving forward in that direction. But what that means is, and we don't ever have to, we can go through and we can incrementally do these things. It has been in the past that we do an update of a full code, but we can take that off the table this time around and just start looking at some of the smaller things. So with that, though, we do need to prioritize what are these elements that we want to look at individually or maybe in smaller groups as we move forward. One of the things that did bubble up, so I've got a couple that I want to just test for consensus here, and then we'll look. I took some notes as everybody was talking to try to come up with a few more to get us to our list of 6 tonight. But, and remember, like, this is just 6 for right now. This is not forever, but we need to figure out a place to start. We need to be able to give staff direction on how they're looking, and we also need to give community a direction so that they know the direction that we're looking and can respond accordingly, depending on what their desires are. So what was mentioned in the executive summary report is that there was a pretty wide support for doing what is left for us that we can do with the city's capabilities to make it easier building ADUs. So I wanted to test that one to see if we do in fact have consensus for moving forward on ADUs as one of the first things that we're looking at. And with that, I'll go ahead and just ask for a vote. So thumbs up, yes, we definitely want ADUs to be on that short list, or thumbs down, the opposite. And it looks like we've got all thumbs up. 10, okay. Councilor Nystrom?
Yeah, I think it's very important that we revisit protections for trees before we move anything like this forward. Because again, it's the same scenario. Subdividing lots or cutting down trees to put in an ADU. I'm all for looking into this. I think it's a great idea, but we've got to be mindful of these things when we're doing this.
Thank you, Councilor. Okay, so we got ADUs as consensus to move forward. So the second one that came through that I wanted to test to make sure that we do fully have consensus on was dovetailing also off of the 2026 priorities that were set at City Council in February that included the desire for strengthening and investing in Colfax corridor. Was the idea is addressing zoning along our commercial corridors, including adaptive reuse, and especially with Colfax in mind, and Councilor Lowe, of course, brought up Sheridan. So some of the things that we would be looking at, that of course would be something that could be applied citywide. Do we have consensus on that particular topic? Okay, I see 10 yeses. And then the next one that I have that came out more tonight than anything is the looking back at the parkland protections, including like the Volk Plain and stuff like that. Do we have consensus to put those, and when I say that, I'm sorry, I should clarify, we're talking about like zoning around parks, protections in zoning for properties around our parks. Is that another one that people are interested in moving forward? Okay, and we have 10 thumbs up there, it looks like. Okay, perfect. And I need to keep up with my notes. Then also tonight, the mention of tree preservation, is that one? I'm sorry, I'm not voting. Councilor Singh, okay. All right. Thank you. So there's 10 on tree preservation. Two more were mentioned. We've got state law alignments, things that get us aligned with state law changes. And then also there was, you mentioned the fixes for the 2012 code. Staff has obviously been keeping track of things that just need a little bit of massaging. And, from a process-oriented viewpoint, those are something that also needs to be looked at. So then we have to see for two more on the bus. So we could do Colorado state law as well as administrative fixes. But before we do we have any others that anyone thinks that should be for consideration in those initial 6? Councilor Sinks and Councilor K. Cruz.
Yeah, I think again, the office buildings, empty office buildings, I don't think that's been covered, has it?
That was in the adaptive reuse for the item number 2.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Councilor K. Cruz.
Yeah, in regards to the tree preservation, could we also include in that just environmental and sustainable? Because there was protections towards solar and things of that nature. Could it kind of encompass some of those good sustainable environmental practices that were pushed in the zoning code?
And I don't know, maybe if Mr. Parker might be able to speak to that, but I'll mention that the enhanced development menu is different. Maybe there's a way they can fold it together, and that even might actually be something sustainability committee work may want to take on to start to look at that ahead of time. Mr. Parker, would you add anything?
I think you're absolutely right, Mayor. And in addition, I'll say if you do move forward with technical changes to the 2012 code that are needed, that's something that we bring forward every couple of years. Is the enhanced development menu. So we'll certainly continue to bring forward. I think those are pretty universally supported. So I think we'll continue to bring forward those changes to the enhanced development code.
Councilor Cruz.
Thanks. Yeah, just to clarify maybe the scope of the technical changes, does that include some of the non-controversial map fixes and and also the gas station, but for EV charger. Like there are just like a couple of like very technical conversations we had that I think are important. Just wanted to understand the scope.
I mean, we'd be looking at your city council's guidance on technically, because a lot of what was in the new code was technical changes. You're absolutely right. We had a bunch of new rules for EV charging stations, for traditional fueling stations. We had rules around landscaping and screening of uses. So we'll try to put together a summary and a list of the changes that we brought forward that then, city council can determine what falls into that category of technical updates.
And could that include map updates too? Like the non-controversial map updates?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there was only one controversial map update. So I think the rest of them move forward without comment, and we could bring those back and show those to you for your approval.
Councilor Love.
Two other quick clarifications of the things we had consensus on the corridors. Yeah, thanks for clarifying the adaptive reuse. That makes sense. I mean, I assume this is kind of like a clear next step, but can we just be explicit that like in designating that a priority, we would kind of like staff to come back and like give us some explicit recommendations on like what specific other policies we might look at to promote the kind of, mixed use residential that we would like to see on some of these corridors. Because other than the adaptive reuse in the office building and maybe a couple of tweaks around, ground floor retail, it's not clear to me like what the concrete changes to the code would be, but I'm very eager to have staff recommend other stuff to us.
Was that for me or was that for Mr. Parker?
Well, I guess it's a question for I guess it's probably it's a clarifying question of like when council says that we want to move forward on the corridor, I assume that means direct staff to come back with some specific next steps. Is that your understanding as well, Mayor?
Correct.
Okay, great.
Well, let me clarify. So what is the planned next step after tonight would be, okay, we come up with this group of 6, right? And then we send our lovely planning department out to do research, and I'm sure there's other departments that will be involved in this, but to figure out what the scope is of that work. Like how easy is ADUs just a couple of quick things? Is that going to be hard? Is it going to be a lot? Or like, it sounds like with the technical changes, we would need to schedule a study session where we're like really, rolling up our sleeves and learning about some of those, and then we're picking them out. So what the plan is that we will identify the things tonight, and then the next few months, we've got staff is out looking at what needs to be done, how that gets done, what that scope is of the work, and then we will come back in a meeting that will be when we parse out, okay, now we'll start with this, let's go with this, like what feels like low-hanging fruit, what might take some more time, because obviously going through 6 things will take a little bit of time. We're going to need to prioritize. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does.
Okay. Councilor LeBure.
Yeah, this maybe is a question for Director Parker, but I remember there was I'm trying to look through the old zoning ordinance with some red lines, and I'm having a little PTSD, but I was wondering, there was some provision in there where there was a concern about sort of McMansions in the neighborhood due to some state law changes. I don't know if that's ringing a bell with you, Director, or not, but I think that should be something we probably look at if there's some concerns with that.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that. That the new state law prohibits us as a city from limiting the number of residents in a single family home. So right now, there's no upper cap on the size of a home in Lakewood. It's just determined by your setbacks and your lot size. So we could, I think that's where the cap on a single family home size came from, and we could certainly bring that back up.
Yeah, that's one I would throw out as a possible consideration that I think would probably have some universal appeal. So I'm just throwing that out there. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Cruz and Councillor Nystrom.
Thanks. Just a couple of quick things that I just wanted to put on the table. One, for the corridor one, definitely vote yes on that. And I would be remiss in not speaking for probably the Ward 1 and Ward 2 contingent, and like not wanting this to just continue putting development in all of the places that are the only places being developed right now. I think that that's really important to our constituents. And so just hammering in on that, that means corridors outside of just the areas that are absorbing a lot of development right now. And then two, I mean, I think there's a lot of different things that we could put on the table in this 6, and maybe this is outside of the scope, but considering staff capacity, I would maybe even recommend that one of these 6 is like figuring out what the process for facilitating like educated, informed, and inclusive community engagement on these issues across people, again, who may not always be the most motivated to come to the table, but this really matters for, look like that to me does take work. It's going to take investment of resources, and is just important to me as some of these policy changes and how we move things forward. Because I think we all agreed that we have to change how we the conversation. So just putting that on the table as well as something to consider within this.
Thank you. Councillor Nystrom.
Thank you. I guess this is actually for Director Parker, related to enhanced development menu. Is there a source document that we could work off of? Because I've seen a few handouts with like, here's what we changed in EDM and stuff like that. But like, what is the actual EDM document that we could reference in, whether it's a sustainability committee meeting or anyone that's looking at this to incorporate changes?
Sure. We can certainly send that out to council. If you want to find it in the interim, it would be the redlined Article 13 from the previous effort. So we made red lines to Article 13 is where EDM lives. The red lines of Article 13 in the previous zoning update, those were the changes that were recommended. So we can certainly put that together in a new form as well.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Councillor Furman.
I did have a quick question as it pertained to when we start to get the input from city staff. Is there any space for some of these discussions? And what I'm thinking about are some of the changes that were done to the zoning to simplify things. And by that, I do not mean the simplification of the residential zones. I mean some of the other areas around sort of mixed use and those kinds of things that were talked through in a sort of public forum by Planning Commission. Is there a benefit to having Planning Commission talk through some of these things as another location for people to hear about them and for another sort of educated input on some of these pieces? Is this really going to be a staff city council piece at this point?
Are you looking for me on that, Mayor?
Well, like either one of us, I think, could probably say a few words. But I see a definite role that the Planning Commission could play with any of these items that we pick.
Yeah, and the Planning Commission is a part of any zoning change. So any changes that happen to the zoning code will have to go back through the Planning Commission for a recommendation to council. So they'll be a part of whatever process we all put in place.
Councillor Black.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo a couple things that my fellow Councillor Cruz said. First, I like the idea of kind of putting this sort of concept of one of the 6 or in addition to the 6 this idea for a process, because sort of what I'm noticing respectfully is we're starting to kind of get more into the minutia of what things are going to look like individually with these 6. But I think, if I'm not wrong, what we're trying to do tonight is sort of land on the 6 large buckets with the knowledge and the idea that there are going to be many additional discussions about kind of the individual segments of each of the buckets that we prioritize. So I think understanding the process will be helpful both for counselors and for our community. And I do think that is a really important piece of the discussion, so that we don't potentially get too lost here tonight in those kind of details, because I know that stuff is really important. I myself have a lot of thoughts and comments and ideas on each of these individual 6 buckets that I think I'm going to have an opportunity to share, many times in the coming months. So I think that is really important. And then I wanted to, if we're kind of redirecting back to the 6 that are important, I just wanted to echo, I do think the state requirements and sort of solidifying those pieces are really critical. One of the things that I hear and have heard from constituents and developers again and again is the confusion in Lakewood about how to move forward with development. And so I think that aligning some of the state requirements with what's happening in the city will help alleviate some of that confusion that I hear over and over again, which prevents any type of development from moving forward in Lakewood, whether that's affordable, sustainable, environmental, or otherwise. So I do think that's a really important piece. And then finally, I just do want to echo, and I think we'll have a lot of opportunity for discussion about that. It's so easy to put all of the development in the places where there is the least amount of voice and input. And I know that we're really mindful of that in our ward in particular. So I think that's just an important element.
Thank you. Councilor Kate Cruz.
Yeah, one of the things I just wanted to bring up in regards to is this something that could be done is an opt-in option, right? There are areas, vacant lots, and there are pockets of our city where I think that there are individuals that want to see this missing middle housing. Is there an option to potentially introduce an opt-in program where there's a petition process among the block to introduce missing middle? Especially for parts of the city where there are neighbors, there are areas that want to see this in on their streets in their neighborhoods.
Certainly,
probably works out that idea.
We can bring forth anything that council directs us to.
Okay, I would just put that forward.
Ryan?
I was just going to speak to Councilor Kate Cruz's comment. I know the city of Cincinnati did that very thing. So we would not be creating anything new. We could copy.
Councilor Lowe.
I just wanted to say I think it's a really good idea. I think it's something that I feel like it's an idea that should be on our short list.
Okay, so we have 4 technically that we could add to our list. That takes us over 6. We have state law, getting in alignment with state law. We have technical fixes. We have putting a cap on the size of a single family home, given the removal of the limitation of a number of unrelated adults in a unit. And then we have an opt-in process. So we also, we could go back and we could revisit the other items that we've already talked about too, if we're in complete fairness, which those are ADUs, commercial corridors with adaptive reuse, parkland protections, or tree preservation. So that's where we are right now. So we technically have 8 as of this moment, if everybody has consensus with the last 4. Before I try to see how we can land this plane. Councilor Nystrom?
Sorry, just one quick question. I just want to clarify when we're saying state law or compliance with the state law, has there been an analysis of what we are compliant with versus what we're not compliant with? Because my understanding was our zoning around the transportation corridor was already compliant before we, moved down this upzoning path. So I'm a little confused.
Yeah, that would be part of the process. So it would be any of the state laws that the last code would have brought us in alignment with. And then in addition to that, there are new potential state laws that we need to be looking at that came out of the 2026 legislative session. So it would be learning all of those and figuring out, moving forward from there.
All right, thanks.
Okay, so thoughts on, let's start with the technical fixes. Again, we have to eliminate 2 from our list, although we haven't technically voted in these last 4. But technical fixes, how do we feel about picking those up in our next iteration? Just the technical stuff that needs to be cleaned up. Councilor Lowe?
There's a little, it's cutting corners just a little bit, but could I make a slightly cheeky suggestion that we combine the park protections and the tree protection ordinance into one item? They seem to pair remarkably well together. I realize they're different, but in fairness, the park protections are incredibly low-hanging fruit. We already have them drafted. It kind of feels like it's a matter of just repassing it. It's the tree protection, I think, that requires a little bit more work. So I would advocate that those be sort of occupy one spot, not 2.
Mr. Parker, would those cleanly fit in one spot, not 2?
Certainly, yeah. As Councilor Lowe mentioned, the tree preservation ordinance is going to take some work. We haven't written that. We haven't debated that. The parkland protection, he's right, that's, you've already passed it once. It's already written. We can just bring that forward as written. So we can tack them together. There's no additional work to the parkland protection stuff.
So it sounds like then the answer or the question is, do we want to do parkland protections quickly? Or do we want to all-encompassing include tree protection? Councilor Nystrom?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, I think we need to revisit the park protections that were implemented because we omitted a lot of parks that were not 10 acres or more. So that, again, has brought up a lot of consternation from people that have small little neighborhood parks and they're concerned about them. But, so I think, I forget who made the point earlier. I think it was Councilor Ryan about Cincinnati and what they did. I mean, there's the obvious thing is we could grab what Denver does now for tree protection, take a look at it, see if we need to tweak it. It wouldn't be as large an effort. We don't have to start from 0, but I just, I think we need a little discussion around those things. But other than that, yeah, I mean, I'm good with moving it forward.
So we're okay, I guess thumbs up if you're okay merging those 2, which would potentially delay parkland protections.
Oh. Can I change my mind?
Yeah.
Six.
6 yeses?
Yeah, 6 yeses.
Okay.
Mayor, can I
Okay.
suggest, can I
please
just offer a thought? I know we were looking at this magic number of 6, of kind of 6 buckets. I wonder if we could simplify and increase that to 8 and add all of these and so then we're keeping the tree preservation and the parkland separate, because it sounds like they're kind of on different paths anyway. And just increase our list to 8 different buckets that we look at. You send that to staff and we'll work on a scope around each of those, and and we'll have to come back to kind of level set and to make sure council is comfortable with that kind of scope. And then it's gonna need a real opportunity to go out into the public and to have those conversations, whether it's a board meeting or listening sessions or in whatever manner we can do, so that there's a lot of public engagement around each of these. So staff is fine with looking at this in 8 different buckets, if it's all right with you.
Okay.
It makes it a little bit easier than merging them and trying to kind of figure out how to do that.
I appreciate that. Yes, I think that would be much easier if we could do that. Councilor Furman.
I didn't think you'd get right to me, but since we were talking about bringing everything in, I wanted to make sure I got a clarification on what we're talking about when we say opting in, right? Because of the opt-in version, I would assume is going to still need to, unless you're intending to opt into a much higher level of density and sort of, something else. I'm assuming it needs some zones created, because I assume we're talking about opting into some zone that doesn't already exist. And that makes sense. And that kind of goes along with what I was saying when my first comments, and that all works. My second question is, what would be the distinctive piece here versus people just applying for a rezone? And I'm assuming, and this is just an assumption, you can correct me if I'm wrong, are we talking about getting a neighborhood together as a holistic rezone just to expedite the process? So those are admittedly 2 questions, but I'd like to understand those before we move that one forward, just so I really understand what we're talking about.
And to answer that, I would hand the floor over to one of our counselors that is interested in bringing the opt-in forward.
Yeah, the thought process would be obviously to allow a neighborhood to opt in, right, to streamline the process a bit, right? There are parts of, I could say, Ward 3 that were heavily interested in seeing this type of missing middle housing, right? And rather than allowing just one home to go through that process, that would allow that whole stretch or that block to be able to opt in. I'll allow my co-councilor Lowe if you want to jump in on any of that as well.
Yeah, is that okay, Mayor?
So far.
This is a good example where if we start to get too deep in the weeds, I think we start things get muddled. I think Councilor Furman's point is well taken. Like what exactly do we mean by opt-in? I mean, Mr. Parker, is that enough direction that you feel like you and your team could come back with a short list of options of what a workable opt-in could look like, if the goal is to sort of allow folks for more options and sort of at the block by block level, but only if there's demonstrated community buy-in? Is that enough direction for you to kind of give us a short list of options?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be simple, though. I think Councilor Furman identified the issue. To have an opt-in system, we have to create the zones that could be opted into. So we'd have to be creating and adopting the RLA and B zones or whatever zones you choose, and maybe not mapping them today, but creating them, putting them in the code and making them available for neighborhoods. So there are a couple steps, and it's not necessarily quick and easy, but yes, it can be done.
I mean, presumably another possible option is not create a new zoning district, but simply amend the existing R1 district to say there's a new rule across all R1s that at the block by block level, when a certain petition gets circulated and a certain threshold is met, an individual property is allowed to convert to a duplex, let's just say, without needing to rezone, right? Some version of that could be an alternative, or maybe you bring both options to us and then we debate which one is better.
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely.
Okay, so I would advocate let staff come up with, either give us one clear recommendation, or if staff feels like it could kind of, they want our input on, it's better to give us 2 or 3 options. They come back and then we can have a more in the weeds discussion on what the opt-in means. But I'd sort of advocate proceeding that way.
One thing to keep in mind too is we have this really interesting committee called Housing Policy. So this could also be something where if we feel like, I mean, this feels like it could be a big-ish conversation, which absolutely could lend itself to committee work. So I don't know that we need to decide that so much tonight, but maybe for our housing policy commissioners that are on here and the chair, that may be something you want to think about as being a possible agenda item after we get our part 2 on this conversation in the fall, once we have a little bit better idea of what some of the scope of this is and staff. So maybe if you see options and you bring forward, we can work through some of that too. So I just want to be really thoughtful about the fact that we're sending a lot of work back to this department, and the bigger it is in scope, the smaller the amount is that we're going to be able to get implemented sooner than later. And I know, we've got a number of appetites from parkland and tree preservation and some of the other things that we really want to get some of these back on the docket sooner than later. So if there's things that we can use committee work for to kind of reduce the bottleneck that's happening here at council, that's something we ought to consider too. Councilor Black?
Are you able to at this time now reread us the list that we've created in full? The 8 items?
I can read you, yep, because we need to make sure that we are in fact all in agreement on these items. So we're ready to do that. What I have is ADUs, commercial corridors, which includes the adaptive reuse, parkland protections, tree preservation, state law alignment, technical fixes from the 2012 code, an opt-in process, and capping the size of single-family homes. Councilor LeBure.
Yeah, so I don't think we really had a discussion about the state law piece. And that's something I would want to have more discussion about before saying that was a part of the ones we should be moving forward.
All right, let's do it.
And I, trying to recollect what the zoning ordinance said, but of course, we all know, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there were some issues or concerns about the parking laws and whether or not some of those state laws were constitutional or not, and they're obviously being litigated. So I obviously think, that one would be something that would be politically, I think would be one of those hot button issues that I think a lot of people in our community would have concerns about if we're talking about, moving that forward. Obviously, I know it sounds it sounds weird to say that we wouldn't want to move, in alignment with some sort of state law. But of course, if there's questions of the constitutionality of it, then I think that's where the issue ends up being, fraught, I think, with the residents. So I'd love to talk more about that one.
Councilor Icruz.
Thanks. I understand and respect the desire to hear all the different voices on like what ultimately was a state process that the state should be accountable to, right? And how people are feeling about what they're doing. And I agree that there are some things going through the courts and we're not party to those. And my understanding, right, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Parker or Ms. McKinney-Brown, but there are like consequences potentially with our availability to get funding for affordable housing if we don't adopt some of at least the minimum standards. I think there are some things we're meeting, but parking, I think the upcoming Home Act also is not something we're going to be in compliance with right off the bat. And I wouldn't want to jeopardize our ability to qualify for Proposition 123 funds.
I think that's correct, that there are consequences from state funding for not complying with the state law. And I think the way that we handled it in the parking, works out either way. I think we said something, we left our parking requirements, but said projects that fall within the state the state map for transit are exempted. And if that state map is found unconstitutional, then that goes away, right? So I think we can adopt state law in a way that, we keep our existing rules if the state law is found to be unconstitutional.
Councilor Black.
Yeah, additionally, I would argue respectfully, if something feels that could be contentious or political, sort of what we're looking at today is what are the top things that we need to sort of look at moving forward or not moving forward. And so I would argue that something potentially being highly contentious or having penalties at the state level or being political might arguably or be a reason to put it higher to the top of the list. Since what we're trying to do right now is to decide as a body, what are the most important things that we want to look at a process around. And yeah, I think if we're at risk of being penalized in terms of, monies and things like that, that's a big reason to make sure that we're sort of reflecting on this a little bit more fully and looking at the process and sort of determining next steps to sort of take it out of the mix altogether, because it feels political, feels like a potential oversight from a municipality that's sort of required to look at the state requirements and how they're coming down.
Councilor Lowe.
There's a lot of angles and sort of different ways to refract this particular issue. I mean, the one point Councilor LeBure has a reasonable point that this is not without controversy. Councilor Black has a reasonable point that that's not a reason to not prioritize it. The one thing I just offer is one thing I did hear from a number of folks during the special election on the state law compliance issue is some version of this. Oh, well, if this is repealed, you all in council can easily just go back to the drawing board and make sure that we're complying with 1304, which is the parking minimum bill. That was something I heard a lot. So I just thought it was, and honestly, I said at the time, I don't think it's going to be that simple. I anticipated we would have exactly this discussion. But there was an assumption from some folks that if the zoning code was repealed, we were just going to go back and sort of make a much more narrow technical fix to bring Lakewood in compliance with the parking minimum bill. So it's more complicated than that, but I would offer that as one reason that I think given in the wake of sort of trying to figure out a path forward after April 7th, sort of doing a narrow tailored compliance with the parking minimum bill would be a reasonable option. I think on balance, particularly now that we have 8 spots, not 6, I'd advocate keeping it on the list. We can certainly debate it more.
Let's go ahead and vote on the state law part. So bringing in alignment with state law, thumbs up is yes, thumbs down is no.
8 yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 yes, 2 no.
Thank you. Councilor Furman.
I just want to clarify one thing for my own understanding. As we talk about bringing these things forward, we're bringing them forward for discussion on how we might achieve them. And in theory, things may go sideways in such a way that we decide not to bring them any further, right? And I mention this only because, for example, the state law one, as Travis Parker was indicating, with the parking one, and I had a conversation with one of our planning commissioners on this. There are some small, because of the reality is most of the city already complies because of, for example, the way our single family residential neighborhoods were built already comply. It's really the very limited spots throughout the city that don't comply today. So I think we have really narrow things that we can do to be in compliance. So I think I just am sort of reiterating why I voted the way I did on that one, is to point that I feel like on some of these, we may find ourselves on the other side of it. But for the moment, I think it makes sense to look at these, since I think we have some of these with narrow fixes that will essentially bring us to compliance without having impact to neighborhoods. So it's worth the review. So thanks.
Councilor LeBeer.
Yeah, Councilor Furman and everybody else, I agree largely with what folks have said. It's more just, if we're looking for the low-hanging fruit stuff to kind of get through the ringer, I think that was the other stuff we talked about. This is one of those that I think does require more community engagement and does. So I don't think it's something we shouldn't do. Like, we shouldn't try to be in compliance with state law, but I think it's one of those that requires more of a lift. And so that was why I voted the way I did. And so that's what I was reflecting there.
Thank you. The way I see this too is we've got a number of laws, and so it'll ultimately be, council's decision as what those laws are and what's needed to bring us into compliance with those. Then we start to peel off, okay, we're ready to do this, or this one's going to take more work, or maybe this one has, there's an open court case pending on it, that kind of thing. So we won't necessarily be approving them all in aggregate at the same time, but they'll come to us so that we're able to figure out what is actually out there that we need to address. So I think we'll still have the ability to, peel out and make independent decisions on those as we get this back. We did not spend a lot of time talking about the capping on the single family homes that Councilor LeBeer brought up. So the state did eliminate the ability for Lakewood to say, no, we're capping the number of residents in a home. And, that opens up, especially, if we're thinking about some of our, larger lot areas around town, it opens up the possibility that where, I don't know, $1 million, $1.5 million house that's quite large in scale had a limited amount of demand, a limited market before. Now, because we have the ability to, property owners have the ability to put 8 people in a home or 12 people in a home, or gosh, I don't know how many. That puts us in some of our zoning districts in a difficult position in that there is not a cap. And so someone could theoretically go in and build something quite significant, quite out of character of any particular neighborhood. And that was one of the guardrails that we had baked into the code that just got overturned. So I want to bring that up for just a minute for anybody that is on the watching the meeting that may not understand what was a little bit behind that. And then just open it up for a minute of council discussion to make sure that I wasn't just reading it wrong and that we do in fact have a desire to bring that one forward as well. Do you have any council comments on that? Councilor LeBeer?
Yeah, no, I just thought it was a small win that everybody could get behind. So that's why I would support it. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Lowe?
I don't want to be difficult, not necessarily opposed to it, but I will note there was a logic to like that reform was designed to pair with allowing sort of with targeted gentle multifamily, right? Like the two kind of went together. The idea was cap the overall envelope so you couldn't build 18,000 square foot, but then permit, duplexes and triplexes. Okay, so I'm persuaded, as we've talked about, abundantly, that we're not going to just legalize duplexes, triplexes citywide. We need to do a much more thoughtful, incremental approach. One possibility is to sort of tie this in with the opt-in. Say if you're a neighborhood and you're opting in to sort of allow a couple duplexes on your block, then you're also opting in to sort of limit the envelope of a mansion. Another option is to say that's too complicated. We're just going to limit the mansion. It does strike me that if we just limit the building envelope and we don't do the other stuff, I think our housing policy wonks would tell us you're not getting nearly the level of housing affordability bang that you're doing if you do the two of those things together.
Thank you. Councilor Black.
The only weigh-in I had for this. I respect where Councillor Louvier is coming from. I've heard from a lot of people, even in Ward 2, about the desire to not have these massive McMansions. So I just want to say that I really respect that idea of the low-hanging fruit fixes, which a lot of us mentioned. If we did move forward with it, I think it would be a fascinating thing to bring to our constituents and ask them for their feedback. I think that would be a wonderful way to really ascertain kind of where our community is at on this one. So I could go either way on it based on where the body is, but I just think it would be a really interesting one to take to community and see their thoughts.
Thank you. Councillor Furman.
I was going to say, I think this is one worth discussing. I will note it is a tricky one because in at least our ward meetings conversation I've had, there were people opposed to it, even with the concerned threat of large co-housing homes. There were people who opposed to the idea of restricting a house size under any circumstances. Then there are those people, I think Councillor Black was getting at, who were concerned about just allowing McMansions, not so much worried about co-housing, but the idea of like, we don't need, 15,000 square foot homes. So I think there's a variety of reasons for capping the size. The co-housing one, I would be curious whether anyone has heard of any community that has yet had one of these built with the co-housing thing an issue anywhere. I know I've heard rumors, but I haven't actually ever heard of anyone having one. So maybe it comes down to a conversation about whether or not it's a critical concern.
All right, so do we have consensus that we want to do that one, or do we not? And then everybody vote. Yes, if you want it. No, if you don't.
I see 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9, yes.
Yep. Okay. All right. I think we got it. So one more time, I'll just read it out. ADUs, commercial corridors with adaptive reuse, parkland protections, bulk plane, tree preservation, state law alignment, technical fixes from the 2020-12 code, potential opt-in process, and cap on size of single-family homes. Yeah. I won't confuse everybody. Go ahead and vote if that list feels good.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. So stay tuned. We'll have a study session scheduled in the fall to follow up and get staff feedback on all of these items. And then at that point, we'll get the opportunity to prioritize. Once we know a little bit more of what the scope of work would be, we'll get to prioritize, how we want to see these things coming back to us and when. So with that, that was the end of Councillor Finks.
Thank you. I wonder what you would suggest as far as publishing this list or giving the front work to the community, telling them this is what we voted on. How will that be published, and what do you suggest we do in ward meetings, etc.?
City manager?
Sure, yes. So we talked about publishing the raw information that the mayor and I received from each individual council member. So I think you got those individually in advance of this meeting. We can sure make that available. And then through the minutes of this meeting, we can really highlight what those 8 elements are that you discussed today. And that way you can take those 8 and go to the public and have those broader conversations. Does that sound sufficient?
All right. That is it for our zoning topic this evening. Do we have any committee reports? Anybody want to report on any committee work? All right, seeing none, then we have no further business. I will go ahead and adjourn us tonight at 10:09 p.m. Thank you, everybody.